No longer was it chilly without. Only within. Sad is the heart that beats without blood, churning nothing but the open air. Sad too is the body so emptied, though its parts may be capable, it sits, as it must, in stasis, waiting for the eventual rot. Yes, an injured arm can be patched up, but when blood stops its flow, stops racing through the brain, what shall that arm do? How long would Dracula stay sleeping? His slumber was, by all rights, his reward, but there remained a twiddling doubt in Robert's mind, a worry that he would remain in slumber or at least in depression, that he might never again be able to move him on. These past few hours, after a rest of his own in the medical bay, Robert had put himself to as good a use as could be put to. With Adam's help, he had organized the captain's quarters. It was a simple affair, now that Bistritz was on cruise control above meadow-like clouds. When it was done, bookish cabinets flanked the room coolly, and Robert decided to bring Adam to the wheel for an educational moment. Now, son, he said, here meaning son of Frankenstein, you know how steer, if anything, go wrong. Oh, this is nothing, said Adam buoyantly. This is a wheel in the old style. Let's learn again, anyway. The refresher was unnecessary, but, truth be told, both Robert and Adam were glad for it. This mundane business distracted them from recent grief, the body of a man. When Dracula padded up the steps, he dragged himself, not with an elderly stagger, but with the languor of a child half awake in the middle of the night, this despite having slept for a full 14 hours. The man was clearly deflated, paler than before, with widening wrinkles and a hunch to match Igor's old look. At least he was wearing the sporty sneakers he'd been saddled with, which gave him a sort of foxy grandpa look. When he came, no one heard him. When he moaned good eventide whilst wiping one eye, Robert and Adam turned with a jolt. The initial fear and startlation passed, both rushed to his sides, eager to help him or distract him, whichever was needed. Adam, despite his continued insomnia, was all smiles and energy. Sir Count Dracula, you are looking fairly well this night. But you should not be here, piloting the bat. We have taken care of that. But Robert calmly rested a hand on Adam's shoulder, and quieted him. Indeed, Adam had failed to enliven the Count, who cleared his throat to say, thank you both, but at this moment, I seek no compliments, no embraces, no condolences, no reassurances. I seek to move forward. But first, I seek a meal. Meal, said Robert. Trials, taking care of that. Dracula's eyes twitched wider. She is? Robert pointed down the stairwell, toward the dining room. Maybe, didn't see, dining table. They downstepped, and the entire room was dark, uncheered by the hearth that had blazed for former meals. Everything here was a cold, deep blue, unwelcoming as bogland peat, and the armor on the walls shone a little with the eerie drag of moonlight dripping through the captain's window. They felt they did not need to come closer to the table to know that there was nothing on top. Next to the stairway was a little cat bed, containing a little cat, comfortably curled. Robert woke her up, though he considered nudging her with his foot, he ended up squatting to jostle her little cat shoulder. She yawned back to life, stretched lethargically, and asked, with a yet sleepy mouth that seemed half glued together, Wadaya? Trials, said Robert with efforts at patience, any food for Dracula? The whiskered old crone stood up, only to stretch, arching her front half down again. How self-indulgent, Robert thought. Oh. Right. I picked out some canned soup from Drac's pantry. Canned soup. That, really, all you did? Well, I did set it out on the table. 'Tis true, Adam called out, having circled the table. He could confirm that, while not lavish, it was by no means empty, harboring, as it did, for cans. Even Robert noted the faint glow of Adam's eyes as he looked out from Dracula's eat place. I was gonna do more when Drac woke up. Look, Rob, did ya really want me to warm up food immediately and then have it lying there for ages? Trials, that, not, point. Dracula woke up while you sleeping. It was a catnap. Where, your hospitality? And, added Adam, would it not have been grand if you magicked up food? But Dracula stopped this vocal crossfire, his pale hand risen like a white flag. I beseech you, give it a rest. Trials has done what you asked of her, Robert. Actually, I am not sure it is fair to ask any more of any of you. But more on that as we nosh. Dutifully, Adam stoked the hearth. It was decided, tacitly, that the soup would not be warmed in the kitchen, but heated up on the spot. They balanced their soup cans on the ends of cast-iron fireplace utensils, with Adam doing double duty, holding soup for Trials. Thus they crowded around the fire, all crisscrossed except for the cat. For the first time, Trials noted Dracula's trendy sneaks. Goin' for a night out, Drac? I may not look my best at current, Dracula acknowledged, the fire doing its level best to add strength to his features, and this is only our first major setback in the face of many to come. I cannot move backward, but I also cannot force all three of you to fall headlong into death, as Walter Whipple unfortunately did, due to my own selfish desires. I will have you know I harbor no intention of letting anyone else expire in my care. All of you are permitted to leave this mission if ever and whenever you desire, even at this very moment. With his free hand, in nimble fingers, he flashed two objects from his handy cloak, a vial of the remains of Alice's moon, mingled powder gold and loon dust, and a vial filled with brownish blood approaching the color of shag carpet. I will give money generously, and even administer the werewolf serum, should any of you want to fit in for the first time in your lives. Adam had no wish for riches, for him, 'twas the shag that captivated. Here came the vision of him, even him. Walking among the common folk, learning their manners to hide his lesser nature. Words leapt to his throat, and 3 letters, grabbing his tongue, launched themselves to the forefront of his mouth. Reader, you may think you know what those 3 letters were, as did Adam. I do. But what he actually said will surprise you and him both. He blurted out, "Why?" The fire sizzled, giving the metal lacquer of their soup cans a nice browning shell, letting labels flake and fall in the ash like leaves. Why should I want to join the society that just killed our virtuous friend? Again and again I have borne witness to the depths that where humanity will reach, starting even with my entrance into this world, I dare say, my attempted apprehension without explanation. What he left unspoken was the cowardice he sensed within himself, for he had wanted to fade into that crowd, turning complacent and complicit. He turned to Dracula now. My heroic host, he said, I will stay by your side until the end. The end, you say, his host replied. By which you mean, for the next 3 days. That, soon, huh, Robert Sayask repeated. Squinting at his can, he pulled it from the flames. The 2 vampires followed suit, for their cans were all covered in a satisfying black crunch. Me, get, can, opener. No need, said Dracula, he was scraping a fireplace shovel along his can's lid. Soon all soups had been op-ed, all long utensils set to the side and all short spoons in hand. The group remained sitting around the fire with their cans on the carpet. It fostered something to eat this close together, as if they all were the couple, in their younger days, from Citizen Kane. But it brought out something else too, something like claws, and it is easy to lash out with such proximity. So Drac, said Trials, you said we could get out any time, even this very moment. Dracula sipped a spoon of low-sodium condensed blood. That is correct. Are you kidding me? We're 10,000 feet in the air. If I got out right now, even I couldn't land on my feet. Robert cast his spoon roughly into his soup, and the can toppled and spilled. Oh, hush, up, Robert growled. Don't, you, know, Dracula, being serious? This, not, time, for, jokes. Excuse me, I, was, being, totally, serious, ahuhaha, Trials fired back in mocking gasps. You still aren't smart enough to put together complete sentences, but at least I have enough brains to know when to bow out. This whole trip became a huge drag once that old fart died. I'd rather go back to my nice safe Stonehenge and keep watching the moon disappear for good than stay and watch a bunch of old Halloween costumes get beaten up by wolves. I had, up, here, with, you, Robert griped, miming how high up he had had it with her by putting his hand up pretty high. Best, flaky, cat, like, you, leave, early. We, never, possibly, work, together, well. At least we can agree on that, fish face. Adam begged them, why, oh why, can we not all simply getteth alongeth, ye travellers? Oh, can it, she said, and he did, sadly sipping soupy supper. Who do you think you are, anyway? Shaky spear? That is enough bickering, Dracula hushed, though sounding feeble. Trials, I understand and respect your decision. Robert and Adam, please do the same. I shall set a course directly for Stonehenge and drop you off there, my furry friend. The entire cast and crew sighed a lethargic air out from their chests, and Dracula moved to take the wheel in its new direction. Robert shook his head. Don't see how we save aliens, just 3 people. Not my prob anymore, Bob, said Trials. We will cook up a way to accomplish our feat, to be certain, Adam assured, gulping a gob. What far more consumes me, as I consume this consommé, is, however could those werewolves in South Africa give Bistritz such leave without even attempting to attach him to the ground, take him into official custody, or even at the very least drape an overlarge tarp over him to ensnare him? That danger has passed, and those fears are of no consequence any more, said Dracula from the pilot's deck, hollering mellowly down the stairs. Though he found that the wheel was caught and stuck somehow, no worry was conveyed in his voice. I assure you, Robert, more allies can be found, oh dear. This is the cause of the steering wheel snag. It appears someone has put a bicycle lock on the wheel. No wonder I cannot adjust it. Indeed, the wheel was locked in place, the chain was hot pink. Did one of you affix this lock and forget to tell me? Curious, Adam said, sipping more soup. Then he fell backward, his meteoric soup can flying, and he tumbled into a violent coughing fit. His eyes bulged and his skin was turning a tomato-like shade of red, possibly beet red, but definitely some sort of vegetable color. After a moment's raging, he spat up an entire clove of garlic. He spluppered, oh Trials, did you accidentally put a garlic in my soup? But, Dracula revealed, I do not keep garlic in my kitchen. But, Alice revealed, I do. A door next to the hearth swung open. She had been standing behind it the entire time. Alice removed her edgy sunglasses, for only then could she see, and hung them on the neck of a secret agent trademark, the black overcoat. Her human, unharmed, fair-skinned human face placed her age around 35. Blonde human hair extended to her shoulder blades, tied back with a red ribbon. With so many recognizable character design elements, it was more a wonder than ever why she usually kept the werewolf on. Her wrist communicator, its speaker and microphone cranked up hyper-high, not only picked up everything Alice heard, but also broadcast words from the world capital itself. But not from Igor. This is Commander Alice Liddell speaking, said Alice, raising the communicator to her lips just for show. Everything is in top shape. Woof. I mean, excellent, said a feminine voice with an odd metal sheen, an imperfection which seemed to betray the limits of even the most spectacular watch technologies. Every other body in the room went rigid. The words of Dracula slid down the stairwell like swamp ink, so Igor's people are trickier than I thought. In a flash, the Count himself was back, staring Alice down again. This time his allies and the fireplace sat between them, Trials riled, Robert rising and Dracula told them, stand ready to strike, my friends, but make way. H-hack cough, bluttered Adam, who yet wiped garlic from his tongue. His present condition was his own fault, in a way, for Alice had fed him garlic by opening and resealing his soup can. We might still pity him, his era was not familiar with craft glue. Here stands the murderer of a sworn friend. This is why I do not tend to associate with the non-vampiric, they're always coming over uninvited. The only time you're wasting with your speeches, Alice said, is your own. Dracula, in one deft and fluid movement, whirled forth and thumped his forehead into Alice's, eyes swirling in a typhoon of color. She was drinking in the evil eye. But then a beacon lit the room, beacon of death. Just as soon as Dracula used the eye, he reeled, as if forced to withdraw his blade by the weapon of a different enemy, for the sun had lanced his back. Light streamed through that single window in the pilot's room, striking him with one long cylinder. Bistritz, his trajectory locked by that unholy bike chain, had broken through to the dawn. The eyes of the buckling Count lost their tantalizing glamour, and his bodily strength departed with the dark. As he writhed on the carpet, that solar lamp blared across his chest, his face, his terror-stricken eyes. While he struggled in this state, Alice kneeled and reached into his cloak to pluck out the vial of golden moon. She rose, leaving him as little more than a withered man, re-aging. As soon as Alice popped open the vial, the gold within surrounded her in a halo. A trace of sunlight was caught in its glint, with a dread archoritic effect. How did the moon gather in this way? It was magnets in the moonstone did the trick. As time crawled by, the halo would clump together again, and the moon would become as it once was. Alice intoned, "It's not murder if they're criminal. It's execution." Through his vast twitches and wormy sweat, Dracula tried, of all things, to boast and banter. Sad display. He stammered with a vibrating smirk, "It app pairs my own powers have been RR restricted." Robert roared into action, racing toward Alice. This, not, stand. But Alice, with a flick of the wrist and nary a glance, seared his chin with a purple laser blast, sending him almost into the fire, the deep-seated phobia. He crashed onto the brick and thwonked to the floor. Trials pulled away her soup can just in time. Adam, too smack-jawed by the flurry of action to speak, and pinkish from the chokesome garlic, at least could begin to fight back. His mummy wrappings coagulated on his headdress now, 2 tendrils became false arms, propping Robert up against the wall, and the others moved to strike. 20 lashes came together in facsimile of meat tenderizer and flew for Alice, hitting nothing but a microwave-ready bag of rice, tossed from Alice's pocket. Rice, like a white firework, spritzed everywhere on the rugs and castle stone. Trials pulled away her soup can just in time. Suddenly the tenderizer went slack, and collapsed into piteous paper. Curses! Dracula belted out with a jolt upright, a move as shocking as if from a corpse. Was this a second wind? No, it was something far more curious. "Oh, curses, what a mess," he continued, crawling to a few grains of the rice. "So many grains of rice. Excuse me, all, let me count these up. I must know precisely how many grains there are." By compulsion, he picked up the grains, one by one, to arrange in neater piles of 10, all on his hands and knees. "Oh, rice," muttered Adam, sounding exhausted. He dragged himself to Dracula's side to help him count rice, that is. Actually, he was making himself a burden, taking some rice from Dracula's piles to bolster his own. "Stop that," Dracula said, and he took some back. That old trick works even better with 2 vampires, Alice observed. "I'm a woman who knows all your weaknesses. Call me superstitious if you must, but I have been raised among far stranger beings than you lot." With hands plunged into her nefarious pockets, she turned to the fish, then the cat, reluctant. Fire for fish, water for cats. Correct? The 2 could not suppress their audible gulps. Alice lobbed a vial of holy water at Trials, but Robert, diving before her, absorbed the blow, taking it like a succulent. He shouted in his famous wild boar tone, glass and his body shimmered on the carpet. "Meow," cried Trials. "Looks like we're outta here. Transport Bloodsport tennis court." "Nothing happened." "Thought you could just make up," said Robert, fish of frustration. Alice had just unsheathed a flamethrower, a fold-out model which went from pocket size to over-the-shoulder bigness, when a strange twinkle-twinkle sound punctured the room, almost like that puncturing sort of light now hovering inches from Dracula, except this time for the ears. The sound hung in the air. The commander now stood frozen, terror-stricken. Robert and Trials watched her and gulped, but it was a gulp of a different color, one of vigilance. They heard a coming patter of tiny feet. Alice stared ahead, at the wall. "They're here for me," she whispered. Who? Said the metal voice in her wrist communicator. She screamed, with a fury beyond anything even the world president had witnessed. Wonderland. Rice, breathed Adam. Dracula slapped his hand. Oh, no, rasped Robert, shoving himself off the floor. Not Wonderland. Wonderland. Trials repeated with some elation, remembering it as the home of a feline relative. Uncle Smiles. Robert mumbled with rolled eyes, maybe, good, you, join. Then the patter reached the room, nothing but a tiny squirrel in adorable human clothes, running on two legs. Clearly he was only passing through in delightful fashion. I'm late, he was chirping. I'm late. Somebody follow me out of curiosity, or to make sure I safely reach my destination. I'm late. Too many times had Alice followed squirrels, rabbits, and similar tardy animals. She well knew that whosoever followed that furry psychopomp would be led to Wonderland, a place of utmost nonsense. No, they did not even need to follow. If the squirrel's offer had no takers, he would grow tired of the game, his character would change, he would be forceful and devious as had been experienced by many a soldier in her employ. Treating the squirrel like a lobbed hand grenade, she fled the scene by twirling into a closet. Trials also knew the dangers, but, evidently, did not mind or care for when the critter passed by. She was off, kicking up carpet in her wake. Oh, you, Robert moaned, and whatever the opposite of humor may be, it echoed in his voice. He watched her chase the squirrel into the hall, heard the faint beginning of a spell, and then they were gone. And still Alice hid, as if some fallout left by the squirrel needed to die off before she would risk emerging. Ah, well. Robert knew that Alice was anything but defenseless. Rather than go for a foe he could not beat, he surely needed to pack some heat or find some other Alice-harming wolfsbane. So Robert, too, disappeared into Bistrit's depths, only in a direction entirely other. And the vampires remained counting. Afternoon light had overtaken the whole dining room, putting the fireplace to shame. Alice, the super soldier frightened into a closet by a dashing squirrel several minutes prior, now opened the closet door with a monumental sigh of relief. The squirrel was long gone, taking with him the chance of an unwanted ticket to Wonderland. But he would be back. Dracula and Adam yammered about rice, which is a delicious dinnertime accompaniment to yams. It is also fun to count. Drax arched back, barely moved, and stayed well within Alice's gun sight. The others, the fish, the cat, the squirrel, are all still in this bat building, Alice gathered from a sniff. Still much to do around here. But first, a stake. For with a silver nail was this gun loaded. The nail launched harpoony into Dracula's back, so it appeared, but many strips of Adam's papyrus interceded at master speed, and the stake was stalled by them as by a phone book. Adam did not seem to feel any pain. He and his strips did not appear weakened one bit, either, by the sun. 20, 21, 22, whispered Adam, counting. Well, said Alice, keeping her cool. The silver bullets, then? And these she shot wildly about the room, toward chair backs, table legs, hanging paintings, and the bodies of her enemies, and none hit their targets. They were swallowed by the best of all yellow pages, which spread from Adam in likeness of the limbs of an octopus, the rays of the sun. Oh, bother, she cursed. If only I had giant shears. She paused dramatically for 8 seconds. I'm sorry, lilted her Brownhouse connection. What was that? Were you talking to someone? Alice raised wrist to muzzle. I said, if only someone would find my coordinates and airdrop me giant shears. What's the magic word? Chop? Please, Helen, time is of the essence. Submitting request for giant shears, interrupted Helen, and thank you for the magic word. The other magic word is respect. Respect your coworkers. Her metallic voice was buoyant, barely fazed by Alice's rudosity. Alice ignored her comments, she refused to admit defeat. Make that silver shears. Time frame? 30 minutes. Too long. Drop them in, but I'll pick off the small fry first. Helen growled a Roger. Again, she was not perturbed, she was merely a werewolf. Alice ripped a second bag of rice apart, then carefully sprinkled a trail of it toward, and then into, the fireplace. No trick on these simpletons was a bridge too far. But Dracula had watched her, and he spat into the fire. "And you think that will work on us?" he sneered. "On Adam, who rules the sun, and on I, who have run across hot coals on many an island vacation." "Worth a shot," Alice tossed back as she left. 52, 53, 54, whispered Adam, counting. When telling visitors of his haunt, Dracula is fond of saying, "You may go anywhere you wish in this castle, except where the doors are locked, where of course you will not wish to go. My ways are strange ways, and there shall be to you many strange things." Trials, of course, had no thumbs. When confronting a door, she could use the thumb-lump-tum spell, but as she did not yet know finger-singer-kinger, in practice, this was useless. To say nothing of her ignorance of hand-blandsand. This problem became major when the squirrel slipped under a doorway. She halt-skidded before one door and rattled off the spell, but the lonely thumb only rolled from the brass. Did the journey end here? She dared not burn down Dracula's door. Did the journey end here? Ruminant thoughts were circling her mind, regrets, for she had plunged herself into great danger with creaturemen whose weaknesses, in the end, were garlic and rice. Her aim was not pure malice and mischief, yet neither was she heroine. It was freedom she wanted. Freedom from a body that people burned, freedom from a journey that now seemed doomed to destruction. However, if she made herself scarce while Robert toe-to-toed with Alice wandered about for a while, waiting for the geezer squad to win or lose, then Bistritz might land, and she might then escape unscathed. Or perhaps the squirrel would emerge again, show her to Wonderland, and there the rigmarole would end. A stomp issued from close behind. A soggy stomp from a marine foot, that of Robert. Trials kept her eyes on the thumb revolving gently on velvet rug. "Look at me." She turned, her body and face betraying nothing, no mood, no sympathy. Unlike her mouth, those saucer eyes told no tales. Enemy, come, you, do, nothing. Putting, squirrel, chase, before, allies. We, not, friends. But, we, people. He crossed his arms. Right? Trials appeared to give his words some thought. I don't have to stay any longer to know I teamed up with the losers. That, not, have, to, happen. Help, us. She looked away, her tail waving like a wisp of smoke. She looked back up at Robert. Then she said, in a voice as small and unassuming as any meow, "Okay." "No, good," grumbled Robert. "Have, to, mean, it. Have, to, care. I said okay, fish head. What am I, chopped litter?" Trials came forward a step. "That's the thing, I don't really care anymore. I don't have a reason to care. I like the moon, I like pretty lights. I'm just a wisecracking cat who's lived for hundreds of years." Robert jabbed his own chest. "I, fish, lived, forever. I, care. It, hard. That, life." Trials chuckled. "Oh, that's rich." Then he went and did it, threw his arms out like pincers, snaring Trials. As she struggled, twisted, and yelled, Robert hissed, "Maybe, lock, you, up, keep, you, safe. That, what, you, want?" The one thought on Robert's mind was triumph, ideological as well as physical, the one on Trials, a line that Alice had said. Fire for fish, her chance at escape. FFF fire pyre multiplier, she shouted, and a merciless fireball consumed Robert's head. Oh, no. Oh, Trials. Oh, what a ghastly development. And then she, the freed cat, she Trials, don't run down the hall. Not while Robert is collapsing in his own sea of fire. In Robert's scrunching, he rolled himself up in a carpet, creating a tube or taco of terror that I pray Trials could not ignore. "My gills," he was wailing. "My gills." The cat turned back. "Water daughter otter," she cast, dousing Robert's gills and rest of body with a soothing splash. Though the ravaging heat was off, he yet panted in agony. He turned to her and managed words of reconciliation, meow meow. Trials had not left fight or flight mode, her every breath could be seen coursing through her body. She approached slowly. Did you just thank me in cat speak? Meow, Robert agreed weakly. Meow, 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 he added, which translated roughly to, I forgive you, as I hope you will forgive me. There have been misdeeds on both sides. Hey, that's water and fire under the bridge. How did you ever learn to speak cat? Meow, meow, he exposited, which meant, I have had many years to devote to language in my eternal fishman life. Such a language is very useful, and much easier to speak when I'm this injured. I guess you're not as stupid as you look, accepted the cat with real respect. Hold on. Heal will congeal. And from friendship's ashes a miracle bloomed, the restoration of Robert's gills, and rest of body, to the fullest vitality they had ever known. All his scars disappeared, even the old burns from the 1950s. The scars from precisely 1,050 years ago, from the time he first met mankind, were finally a thing of the past. He filled his lungs, and grew strong, stronger, strongest, ejected himself from the Raleigh carpet and stood proud on his feet. He screamed rapturously, I feel like a brand new tuna. You can talk without sounding like a winded caveman? Joyous, Robert whisked Trials into his arms and spun down the hallway. I haven't felt this good in 1,000 years or more. Every day my old gills ached so much from old injuries that I could barely breathe. Why, it's as if I had a large spiked ball up my nostril and just now got it removed. You darned cat, you've made me such a happy man. I haven't been this glad since before the Ice Age. Whoa whoa whoa, settle down, oldster. Where we goin'? He stopped in a hallway that looked just like the one previous. With one exception, all carpets, as far to either side as the eye could see, were in place. No burned-up roll-ups here. Robert set Trials down with a sigh, but he was smiling. Sorry, Trials. Got worked up and carried away, didn't I? Me too, apparently, she snarked, but without malice and with very little mischief. I have an idea, though. Can you speak bat? Sure. Eek, eek, eek. Eek, he replied, which meant something like, hello. Nice weather? Bistritz responded far faster than anticipated. Straight away, his vocal cords produced a slight rumble that resounded through the entire backbound castle. His words reached everyone within. Eek, eek, eek. Yeek. Eek, 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 said he. In other words, no, it's too sunny. Yuck. But I'm so happy to chat with my friend Robert. Sakes alive. He can hear that. Robert coughed and began anew. He said eek eek, eek eek eek, that is, Bistritz, we're in trouble. Can you turn back into the darkness? Eek eek eek, eek, eek 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 eek. Eek 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 eek, boomed the reply. Sorry, Rob, I can't move my wings. You'll have to get my steering wheel back in order to drive me out of this gross sunlight. Robert translated for Trials. He says he can't budge unless we return to the bridge and unseal the wheel. Well, if we go past the dining room again, that dog'll know exactly where we are with that nose of hers. Trials, Robert said with a throat-clearing cough, that's the idea. We can't run away, remember? That's not what I meant. I'm talking stealthy hijinks, Bob. Oh ho. Outsmarting her? Robert quirked a scaly eyebrow. Trials quirked. The ridge of her skull where an eyebrow would be for humans. Now you're speaking my language, the other one. Shortly Robert revealed that they were not quite lost. He had toured Castle Dracula more than a few times. If memory served, he would, at the very least, spare them a visit to the dungeons infested with what Dracula referred to as children of the night, meaning not bats but wolves, counterintuitively. If that news were not inspiring enough, the fresh oxygen, which rushed into his body and brain with such vigor now, rarefied him and keenened his senses. This danger was nothing. As they went, Robert even began to puff bubbles from his pipe. Observing the follower cat, he mused silently, "It appears as if this time I am the scientist and she is the Amazonian fishoid." He threw open a door. It creaked ajar, and inside was a yellowed, dingy dustbin of a hospital room, with flickering fluorescents and old equipment dropped among shattered glass. Far away, in a chamber very distant, Dracula's skin prickled. "Oh," he said to no one, "I feel as if my old sick bay for taking care of sick guests has been opened. It really has been a long time since I cleaned that up. It must look like a horror movie in there." 108, 109, Adam counted. The flight of fish and cat threw open another door. It creaked ajar, and inside was a musty garage with various dark stains spattered across the floor, chains rattling from the ceiling, and tall steel shelves housing rusty power tools and cutters. "Oh, I feel as if my old auto garage has been opened," said Dracula. "It really has been a long time since I used those power tools or even owned a functional automobile. It must look like a horror movie in there." 300, 301, Adam counted. The weapon-like tools were all rusty and bacteria-laden, so once again Robert and Trials threw open a door. It creaked ajar, and inside was a spooky old graveyard on a grassy knoll littered with gravestones and old skeleton bones. There may also have been a ghost inside. "Oh, I feel as if my spare room for spare coffins and dirt has been opened," said Dracula. "I should definitely go about retrieving those old toy skeleton decorations. Halloween is approaching, after all. They would make this castle look more like a horror movie for certain." 11, 12, Adam counted. "Wait, what is a movie?" Finally Robert and Trials found a massive closet, which looked not only useful, but also not blatantly horrifying. Close to infinity outfits hung on twin forever rows extending into nether, but the old shoeboxes, hatboxes, and opened Christmas presents under the clothes racks gave that touch of home. "Just the room I was hoping for." "Come in," hollered Robert. And Trials did, but she was not thrilled about it. Dust and must danced before her whiskers. "A bunch of old suits? We aren't getting ready for some fashion show here, bucko," she mewed. Robert was sifting through hangings. He revealed a collection of evening gowns. Trials' eyes bugged. "What's this guy doing collecting dresses? He couldn't pull those looks off with that figure." Robert explained the sorrowful story with his classic patience and grandpappy grin. Long ago, before he was temporarily turned to ashes, Dracula lived with his 3 vampire sisters in Transylvania. When he came back to life, he learned that all 3 were killed by the son of Abraham Van Helsing, Graham Van Helsing. He hasn't properly recovered from the loss, and so when he sees a dress one of them would have looked lovely in, he feels compelled to purchase and hold on to it, for sentimental reasons. He doesn't like to talk about it, though, so don't talk about it, please. "Wow," meowed Trials. "I guess all you monster guys are a little deeper than I gave you credit for. I'm just a witch who got burned and put herself into a cat that she also enchanted so that it/me would live for millennia. And I make jokes. Startin' to feel a little shallow here. I spent millions of years eating fish all by myself in a dark lagoon," Robert sympathied. "I think your story is more exciting than the vast majority of my life." Trials glowed, metaphorically. "Now, let's make haste to the end of this closet. There are no weapons in here, just a bunch of clothes, and some costumes that sort of look like they belong in horror movies, but at the end is a secret passage into another room, a shortcut. That's where we'll make surprise our weapon, ambushing that Alice the best way a monster knows how." And then Trials said, "Hey, look, a knife. Where did you?" "I've been nudging the boxes open this whole time, with my nudging whiskers." So it was, just under the clothing was a line of knocked-off lids and exposed easy ovens. Before her was cardboardage, containing a bent and blunted cookery knife. "Don't call me a cat thief." "You had the same idea." Robert knelt to examine. He was showered in boyish thrill. "Gee whiz. This is the knife that cut Dracula's head off in the 1800s. He rubbed his soggy chin saying, "I gave this to him as a gift a long time ago, but I wonder why he left it in the package." Really? Oh, said Dracula, I feel as if my camping door has been opened. I sent photographs of that room anonymously to Camp Life magazine, photographs which were featured in their spring 1992 issue. Ah, I was so proud, he cooed to Rice Grains. Camp Life is my favorite outdoors-oriented publication. I really should redecorate and send another entry, that is, if the magazine has not ceased after 10 centuries. Ha, ha, ha. Alice had long since left the dining room. Dracula's skin gently sizzled in the daylight. The eyes of both he and Adam gently sizzled in the rice. Incidentally, the fire they crawled closer and closer to was pretty hot. The closest rice grains snapped and cooked before their eyes. Why, what a delight, cheered Adam. They pop like holiday firecrackers. Don't eat that. That is for counting, Dracula said. Elsewhere, Alice followed her nose, and it took her to the dampest spot in the castle. Not the cellar, for Dracula's blood casks were well sealed, but the 2-acre imitation campsite whose sign introduced it as Lake Nice. At a glance, one would presume this place a horror movie set, for it definitely looked like one. Its blue tarp sky and plasticky trees would appear welcoming to none but a motley group of witless camping teenagers. All around were sitting and standing mannequins in fake lakeside chairs, at the barbecue, and horror of horrors, establishing tents for a night-long stay. Worse, conspicuous red spots dotted the grass and dirt. These were merely grape juice, however. Alice bent down and found, almost suspiciously right next to each other, one toenail each from Robert and Trials. she said. Stupider and stupider. She knew this was an ambush. The ample trees suggested ample cover, and so did the lake, the tents, and the log cabin, and she also wondered if Trials could not hide in the queue and leap out shouting one of her trademark quips like, I am a catburger. A lump of mud suggested yet more opportunities, this time for nose thwartage rather than eye thwartage. Alice followed the trail, her prey moved together, into that selfsame spot, but the mud tracks disappeared not 2 feet from the lump, as if, perhaps, maybe, washed away in post by one of Trial's trademark spells. Well, nothing for it but to flush them out. Alice raised a pistol by her head, with the manner and pose of an action movie terminating robot, and it clicked with a Hollywood gun-clicking sound. This click meant, unfortunately, that the gun was in a state of dire disrepair and could misfire. She hurled the gun at a cabin door. No response from inside. She kicked the door in and dove, with another gun, actually sliding in gun first. Then she performed a full investigation or killvestigation, rather, or laser-vestigation, for, in a minute-long laser fest which would have looked brilliant if filmed in slow motion, Alice riddled the cabin and all its contents in burning holes. Everybody was spared, however, for nobody was inside. She left in disappointment as the cabin wobbled in wooden tatters, all wholly like Swiss cheese. The 3 tents were also little help, all she found in there were oil lamps and unsmiling mannequins. Alice walked to the bank of Lake Nice, which was absurdly huge and realistic for a never-used artificial lake in a lonely rich vampire's castle. Then again, maybe it was exactly the superfluous poppycock that one would expect in a lonely rich vampire's castle. She kept her guard and gun up, and coolly sniffed. It did not seem as if her targets had left the room. If they had, she might have heard, or received distant wafts of their mud trails. So she waited, and she was no stranger to wasting time. Elsewhere, Dracula narrated, for he was a lover of good stories anytime, anywhere. Alice Liddell is, technically, among the longest-lived of all werewolves, he told his rice as he compiled 10 piles of 10 grains in a single 100-piece bunch. Though she is not immortal and her biological age approaches 40, she was born in the 19th century. Indeed, Adam agreed, not listening in the slightest. One summer's day in her youth, Alice traveled to an uncanny wonderland by falling into a rabbit hole. On another occasion, she stepped through a mirror into the same and, upon waking in her bed again, debated whether or not she had suffered a second excursion. She compiled her memoirs and sold them under a pseudonym, Lewis Carroll. However, this wonderland was not done with her. As we witnessed, it follows her to this day. But why is Wonderland so awful, you ask? Adam did not ask that. The answer lies in the unpublished sequel manuscripts, which chronicle her later Wonderlandian stumblings, all 372 of them. Wonderland, as all well-traveled creatures of the night know, is cute for a day or two. But across a lifetime? That many word games? How obnoxious. Do not believe for a moment that vampires are subject to a loathsome curse, for more pitiful by far is Alice, who is stalked, day in and day out, by these portals to hell. She did not age in Wonderland, and whenever she emerged from it as if gasping while treading water, the world moved on without her. The first trip consumed a minute. The second, an hour. Each trip took longer and longer, as if Wonderland were hungry for her life. Everything she knew and cherished changed, and then dissipated like dust. She was forgotten, forlorn, in a hard world of technology and werewolves. And the root of it all was that first innocent trip to Wonderland. Then came the year 2996. Already for centuries she had steeled her heart, swallowed her tears, and pledged herself to the pursuit of rationality. But she was not yet a werewolf, and whenever she returned to Earth, she ran from the oppressor wolves, that is, until she added to her rational creed the motto, "If you cannot beat them, join them." She also improved her combat moves. Swiftly moving through the ranks as a patriotic defender of the peace, she re-entered society and today all but rules this new wolf world. Rationality, however, is her only love. Her many years of loathing and fears have turned her into a lone wolf who truly trusts no one. But that may be her weakness, speculated Dracula as he rubbed his chin. The hand rubbing his chin was also holding rice, which he counted at the same time, for unlike Adam, he was able to count silently. She excels at one-on-one combat, but makes a lousy commander, as we have seen. If she were fought by a team of determined individuals, people who truly trusted one another, perhaps she could be overtaken. 1, 2, 3, Adam counted. Alice, concurrently, decided to wait matters out in a prop canoe which drifted toward the center of the 1 acre in diameter Lake Nice. She stared, eyes glazy, into still waters, where the end of her fishing line had been plunked. How comfortable it was, to have a space alone, to be simply bored, nearly able to pretend that there was no job to do. Out here she was bait. If this was what her enemies had wanted to see, let them have it. Besides, she was not unarmed, and she even had another little trick in store, for at the end of her fishing line was something dastardly, a gun. So much for that. Breaking out of the water with arms spread wide like a prisoner freed from chains, amphibious Robert erupted from behind Alice, armed with a cookery knife and, for protection, a hockey mask. So affrighted was Alice that as she turned to grab an eyeful of her assailant, she screamed, "Ega!" He kerclunked her on the head with the knife, and she fell into the lake no longer placid. Robert stepped onto the canoe with a shaking head. "I thought fishers were sharper than that." "And doggers," said Muddy Trials loudly from the shore. Underneath Lake Nice's surface, wild tentacles had grown and writhed unchecked for 1,000 years. Into their grip did Alice sink like a stone. Her moon sank too, but yet revolved around her. Actually, all told, she sank like a hairy stone with an unhairy stone near it, and with some clothes on. She became tangled in vicious kelp. And she thrashed and picked at the grass submarinus, but it was far tougher to untangle than shoelaces. And then she bit the grass to no avail and wondered how much more breath she had. Alice watched as Robert and Trials descended. Not only was Trials in her double-gubble bubble, but she had also swiped off the dirt and gussied herself up in one baby mannequin striped red sweater and jaunty brown hat. Alice laughed, because pets and people clothes were funny, and also because this was her chance to escape. Those two were idiots. Why not leave her in the kelp to drown completely? That would have solved their problems without a hitch. Or they might have zapped the lake with some technology, for everyone knows that electricity is strong against water. Instead, they were unwittingly giving her a chance to brainstorm, to try and make wiggle room for her arms in the kelp, to grab a laser gun and shoot them dead. A rational woman forsaken by love, she could no longer fathom why strangers might want her alive. Then the whirlpool started. Not far away, not long ago, a squirrel had scampered into the lake. Now he spontaneously became a creature with the body of a walrus, the tail of a leech, the head of 2 dogs, 1 ear, 5 eyes, and arms full of teeth. That beast was the heart of a swiftly starting maelstrom, and he shouted, voice gurgling through the lake entire, "This place is so boring. Good thing this vortex is our hot ticket straight to Wonderland, right, guys?" Alice screamed again, ejecting half of the air remaining in her superior wolf lungs in one curdled burst. Instantly Robert swam, and Trials and her bubble bobbed, out of sight. Were they leaving Alice to a 50-year Wonderland in avian traipse? No. Robert had come behind Alice to break, untie, and cut, with his old cookery knife and the help of Trials' scissor-dither lizard spell, all that tenacious kelp, which freed Alice to dual-wield laser guns. With her air dwindling and the beast of the vortex gaining power, time was truly of the essence. She spun around like a Dracula, rapid-firing in every direction. Lake Nice became Lake Lightshow, deadly pink. Trials' bubble burst, and she yipped in the lake's indomitable wetness. Robert was seared in 3 places, his gills spared narrowly. The Wonderland Arctic foe was hit too, but he had strength beyond this mortal realm, so nothing could stop him from ramping up the vortex and advertising his homeland as a great travel spot. Alice, already feeling the whirlpool winds, used her claws to cling to the plastic prop rocks leading up and out to shore. Robert and Trials were not so lucky, and the twister devoured them. Alice climbed, endured that sucking like a bathtub drain at the base of Lake Nice, and made it. She emerged on the shore, and when she looked back, the vortex, satisfied, made itself scarce. The water settled. Wonderland had its fill, as sometimes happened to werewolf soldiers in her employ. The unfortunate thing about this was, their return to Earth could take as long as 50 years, if they were accepted as substitutes for Alice, or as little as 5 minutes, if they were not. Perhaps it would be wisest not to wait and shoot the small fry dead, but instead to finish off the titans in the dining room. Success. Adam, having crawled into the raging hearth, was being ravaged by fire. Now this was a horror movie. "But you forget, dear Alice," said Dracula, who himself was mere inches from the same hearth, only prevented from entering by the space Adam's body took up. Which fact was very painful for him, for if he had access to the rice and said hearth, he would have counted far better. Adam is a man of the sun. Indeed, the one thing in this world that cannot extinguish him is fire. "It still hurts," said Adam. "But that is okay." "Well, that's maddening," huffed Alice, still wringing out soaked clothes. "But try this." She took a few rice granulates from the floor and tossed them on Dracula's back. Adam reached for them with a volcanic hand. By the time Dracula twisted in a vain attempt to count the rice himself, his cape flared, the fire quickly spreading. Then the inferno consumed Dracula too. "Yowch," he cried. Adam began to sob, his tears instantaneously drying up. "Dracula, no." The senior vampire crumbled. Only partially, still, seeing him covered in a fine but growing cover of dust that was not dust, was not heartening for Adam. Dracula fell to his side in agony, teeth gritted. Flopping about in the ash, he screeched between lurches of inconceivable pain, "Hurts so much, but still only turns me to ash, which regenerates." "Phew," said Adam, and though he remained greatly upset, the rice still had him in a swoon. 25, 26, 27. Alice knew Dracula's claim to be true, she'd read his book, after all. For as terrifically awful as the vampire's pain was, especially commingled with their depressing efforts to count all that darn rice, both seemed oddly exultant. That was why Alice could hardly bear to watch. "Well, bother it all," she cursed. With a sturdy boot, she kicked Dracula's shin. Unfortunately for her, the flame helped itself to her boot. She shook off the fire and cursed again. "I suppose I'll have to wait for the shears arriving," said Helen from her wrist. "You're still on," said Alice. "The municator didn't short?" "It's waterproof." "Oh, right, it's future technology, splendid." With a contemptuous eye toward Dracula, she said, "I forgot for a moment that our world runs on logic." But these monsters, these weaknesses, this stake-stopping papyrus, none of it makes any sense? Dracula, flaming head bent even now to the rice, snickered. Of course not. Us monsters, as you love to categorize us, do not find ourselves tethered to the rules of sense you so fancy, Ms. Liddell. We dwell in a realm beyond your wildest travels. This struck a nerve. Shut your mouth, Dracula, she fumed. I bet you've never even been to Wonderland. You're too soft for it. I've taken down demons darker than your deepest night terrors so I could face a brighter day. I won't let you ruin the Earth's chance of eternal happiness, I won't. I am sorry, he said gently, but do speak up, for I am in the middle of counting this rice. Oh, go to where I was. Forthwith, and with a glassy crash, a pair of silver gardening shears exploded through the castle window and tumbled in via the stairs. Jagged and banged up they were, thanks to the fall. Still, Alice took what she got, and with the girthy shears clenched in her hands, she zoomed up close to the infernal count. Locking the shears into a single stake-like point, she thrust them into his yet blazing back a moment too late, for Dracula, with amazing bat-like reflexes, grabbed the point, whipped it and her over his head, spun them around 5 times, and then flung them into the 4 empty soup cans. Alice hurtled through the tin, banged into the back of a chair, rolled up that chair, slid across the table, hurtled off, banged gong-like against a suit of armor, and then was collapsed on by said suit of armor. The shears dropped beside her. Temper, advised Dracula without even a glance her way. You cannot give in to rage in battle unless you are channeling it into the finishing strike. You tried, but, better luck next time, yes? I do apologize for the mess and the condescension, but while you are one of the oldest werewolves, I far outage every one of your kin and carry experience from wars you have never even read about. From before I even became a vampire. Now, if you will excuse me, I must count rice. Counting. It's what I do. Supreme Commander and Head of Defense Alice Liddell, flustered, embarrassed by a fish and a cat and old dudes with a pathetic ricey weakness, felt like leaping right out of the mouth of the bat. But in her mind she told herself, stay put and think, for goodness sake. Helen, she said into her wrist, sounding uncertain at last, bring down some cages, would you? But a band of wolves, wild forest four-legs wolves, led by their alpha male, stormed the dining hall, their numbers and growling hum as overwhelming as a biker gang. Leaving Dracula, his friend Adam, and his trusty table unharmed, Dracula's wolf armada knocked the armor off of Alice, before stomping all over her battered form. She moaned as if leaking ooze. As the children of the night settled and left Alice a clearing, Dracula nonchalantly said, oh yes, I thought I sensed the wolf room being opened. Alice's outrage was kindled afresh when, looking up from the floor, she saw 2 riders on the back of the alpha male. He was 2 times larger than the head of the pack, and wearing an eye patch. It was Robert and Trials. Fish and cats, riding together. You too, she gasped. We've had much worse than laser blasts in our time, Trials boasted. Like, burn much? Huh. I got shot with at least 3 harpoons in my day, riled Robert. But Wonderland. The first trip's not so tough, he said. I quite enjoyed turning into a pig wearing a bonnet. And it was fun to see a world of fellow weirdos, right? Told Trials. Right you are. What was that? Cried Adam. I cannot understand, as I am watching rice currently, and I find it consumes my attention. Not to mention the flame consuming his body. Trials, shocked by the sight of the frying oldsters, used her water daughter otter spell to splash the flames away. As the fire was splattered out of existence, Dracula's ashes happily regrouped, congealing into undead flesh and fermenting blood. Though the count remained weak due to the dining room's continuing status as a box of afternoon sun, his suffering had been cut in half. He buried himself in a blanket, made possible by the blanket train kit anklet spell. As our 2 favorite fiends sighed in drippy relief, Alice, dirted and trampled, lay in dry desperation. It was not hard for her to think of near-future plans. Given enough hours of scrimming and scrumbling about this castle labyrinthine, Alice had a fair chance of subduing everyone in this room. Countless rational thoughts sprang to life. Just take them all out, consider the odds, don't you dare let yourself be overwhelmed. And yet Alice remained on the floor like a deboned cod, her mouth open while her eyes stared up. What so captivated her, and left her gaping, was the unbearable sight of a companionable Robert and Trials. A lively pair who, not long before, had been at each other's throats. Friendship! What sweet alchemy! Her heart stopped a moment, and then revved on as it never had before. It buzzed, then bellowed. Its engines worked with a speed and intensity unmatched by any other moment in her life. It was filled with a thought. A thought? I hear you ask, perplexed. Does a heart think? Of course. It thinks of, and hopes for, the only thought it can, love. It was illogical, simply irrational, revolutionary. That strangeness, that fremditude, is what made its impact crater deep, for only an idea counter to our long-held truths can change us from within. While her heart hoped and rejoiced, her mind thought of loneliness, which stretched for all her years. She had planned to live alone despite the pain, for loneliness was a puzzle which could not be solved by earthly logic. And Helen could not do it, no matter how many coffees she hand-delivered to Alice's cubicle. The Brown house could not do it, puzzles are not solved by their pieces. Alice stood up in a flash. Somebody please get me a mop. A wolf ruffed, Arn? Right away, Alice, said Helen, which would be odd in hindsight, since Alice was about to betray the world government to which both she and Helen had sworn loyalty, and since it also begged the question of why the silver shears had taken so much longer. The mop trundled down the stairs, and in the same moment, Alice cast her wrist communicator into the flames, where its zero-waste polymers cracked apart and dematerialized. Alice, moving delicately through the sea of quadrupedal wolves, mopped up all the rice. She dumped it into Dracula's 15th-century vintage garbage vase. Dracula griped, "Hey, I was counting that." "I surrender," she announced, and she hurtled into a speech for Monster Friend candidacy. As she spoke, facts and pseudo-facts and reasons aligned with a thirst for love, surrounding her like a kind of armor. "I simply do not have the power, nor the tactics, to defeat your group. You are all simply too experienced and gifted. Rather, I see you all succeeding in your journey. Instead of fighting against the changes you're attempting, I have decided to aid you on your quest so you can bring them about more efficiently." She plucked her golden moon from the atmosphere that was her head, and chucked it in the garbage vase. Werewolfinized, metamorphosized. Even after finding a home in this werewolf world we all live in today, I still harbor feelings for the human world we left behind. I know that you yearn for the old planet Earth, and your old hometowns, just as I do. Together, I truly believe we can return our world to normalcy. I, Alice Liddell, will give to you my wondrous skills, in warfare as well as espionage, to make your coup against the government a success. As a bonus gift, to replace the manpower I so callously wiped out in South Africa, I will share secret intel on another being who, I am convinced, has the same wish for a bygone Earth, and will make a fine ally. Dracula came to his feet and stroked his chin. I hate to inform you that my original goal was to simply prevent the spread of werewolfism from leaving this world, he explained. Buo. Adam took him by the arm. Dracula, please. Make a place for her. Be thy heart a stone? Or the brain a scone? With her, we can make our dreams come true. Without her, only alien dreams. Robert took him by the other arm. Dracula, please. We can't take her. When it comes down to it, she's still the enemy. I'm sure there's not a single skill of hers that we don't have ourselves. Trials was still standing on the alpha wolf's back, he was slurping up rice water from the garbage vase. She suddenly felt the room's attention on her. I'm not feeling it. Too bitter, especially her jokes. Good humor does not equal a good heart, said Adam, and Trials knew this to be true, for Adam's own sense of humor was lacking. The way I see it, our prime option is clear, he cried with a hand outstretched. She is a friend in need. Dracula, did you yourself not call her the most pitiful creature of all? Dracula tilted his head. We will. As Alice awaited their decision, a wolf approached to lick her fingers with a friendly lap. Adam and Dracula saw this with growing smiles. Robert looked on with stony disapproval, as if seeking to deny his children their coveted Christmas puppy. "But that's not proof of anything," he said, "quit losing your heads." Trial sauntered into place beside him, taking a seat. "Looks like we got a new monster on our side," she said. She might have added a tisk. "Two monsters, you mean," said Alice. "I'll introduce you to Jaw, the monster shark of Philadelphia." Dracula met the news with a gregarious grin. "I like him already." For Adam, the dark-skied morning after Alice's joining was, to say the least, tumultuous. Make no mistake, reader, he, as unofficial chief peacemaker, was happy for her friendly pledge. Yet he writhed in his sleeping coffin with the fury of 1,000 grubs. In his cloudy head, memories quaint and vile converged, and voices, far voices like a distant country's dead, cried out to him, pleading. For what? For what? For what? He ejaculated, ejecting himself from the coffin with a lid-flinging flourish. Only the flourish, he now realized, was useless, for he had destroyed that lid with his prior night writhing, ripping it to shreds with paper like rough devils' tongues. Thanks to his brief lunacy, the pillow and sheets were not only stationed at opposite ends of the guest bedroom, but torn asunder in confetic formation. Were it not for Adam's luminous eyes, the room would have been pitch black, for the lamps lay shattered, a few pummeled almost into powder. Torn in 80 places, was the picture of Dorian Gray. "Great Greek gods," he cried. "What have I wrought upon this room of my Saviour's home?" Hearing his cry, Robert came to check on him. The hallway door provided more light, and he provided his own gasp of alarm. Still, he was far calmer. "That's the least of our worries," he said. "Dracula's a multi-billionaire. He knows you've got baggage on your back and a chip on your shoulder. I'd say you both have every reason to be down in the dumps right now." "Down in the but nothing has happened to me," insisted Adam. Yet he knew that was not true even as the words spilled from his lips. No great personal tragedy had happened to him lately, but the clouds of his memories were clearing and, in fact, had been perfectly absent during his nightmare, he was sure. Now, if he could only find some alone time in which to recollect those memories in this time of waking. Robert focused on the present. "I disagree," he said, and he gestured to the ruinous room. "Well, do not shed tears for my sake," Adam replied, wearing a grin. "It was nothing but a night fright. I sit here becalmed." "Many thanks to you, friend." "Are you sure? Your complexion is a strange new nauseous yellow. And you look weak somehow. I can make out your muscles and arteries from here. And that papyrus? Is it giving off dust?" He came closer, kneeled by the coffin, and gently touched a papyrus pape. When the wrapping met his webby finger, it instantly sucked the digit dry, not of blood, but of moisture. "Do you think it would be wise to replace this soon?" "I believe it to be more of an extension of my flesh than a cover for it, but now that I consider, I do feel a mite bit thirsty." "Ah." The gilt one lit up, unlike the lamps. "I brought just the thing in case it could help." By the door on the floor, he had set a fooden tray, which he now carried to darling Adam. It held moist, pale tofurkey cubes and a selection of salad forks. "You may prefer real meat, but at least it's moist. Give it a try, won't you?" "My thanks." Adam took a fork, and then a bite. A taste. An unexpected visit to that gustatory land of pure revulsion. This gnarled and contorted his expression into one even creasier than a dead mummy's. He moaned, "Awa, tofu bad. Tofu bad. Ahan." He dashed the utensil against the floor, then dashed himself into the bathroom. "Well, you don't have to act like such a cliché over it." Poor Adam shoveled the soy off his tongue and into the sink as fast as he inhumanly could. As the flavorless flavor fell off, however, his common sense returned. Then came his sentiments. Suddenly there was a vibrant happiness welling up in him, and dripping from faucet eyes. "How long has it been," he whispered to the sink, "since people fretted over my well-being? People neither blind nor imaginary?" What was his nightmare? Nothing but his old life, not a night fright, but a years-long plight. His relationship with Dr. Frankenstein, ruptured from the very start, his agonizing footrace with the Van Helsing party, and a segment in between, something long forgotten. Yet its trauma, most torturing of all, remained. It was Ozymandias in the sands of the heart. For he, Adam, was meant to have an Eve. This he recalled vaguely, could never repress fully. But I have the count. In this most peculiar of worlds, I owe all the friends, security, and blessings of my life itself, to the count. But what if our coup should fail? No, what if it goes right? What if my companions all fly to their places, and I alone fall placeless? Adam flung faucet water into his mouth and face to swish out the rest of the offending meat, and spat. Then he returned upright, looked into the mirror, and realized just why he hated Tofurky. Ever since his visage had faded in Dracula's hand mirror, almost since his arrival in this year of 3001, he had never seen his face. No more of that old pathetic Adam, watching himself in brooks and streams, and crying like the reverse Narcissus. Nothing any more but a floating hat, patches of papyrus on an invisible form. At last his taste for victuals, too, had faded, replaced with a need for scarlet ichor. No longer was he a stumbling babe in a far future world. Whatever lie in wait, this was his time, for his initiation, the baptism of blood, was over. He ran out of his bedchamber, past Robert, screaming all the while, "I'm a vampire! I'm a vampire!" Strange, remarked Robert, I thought he knew. He was a vampire, he was kin, his body itself reaffirmed his belonging, and the completion of the process was like as to the seal of a promise. So potent was Adam's jubilation, so much like the jumping bean, that he careened down the halls, up a swooping staircase, and into parts of the castle so deep that he had never yet seen them. And with those eyes he could see these parts, though the electric lamps along these walls were unlit. Dracula does cut financial corners somewhere, you know. Until he nearly tripped on carpet, which convinced him to check himself. Adam, steadying, bewildered by his own fancy mood, said to himself, how reckless. I have let myself be carried away, it seems. He found himself in an empty hall, with all doors shut. Neither hostile nor welcoming, simply lonesome. He cast his eyes on a bronze, bat-head doorknocker which, to him, shone as readily as if in brightest sunbeams since, in fact, they were in eye-beams, two lights as bright as little lamps, thoroughly changed by the whims of the baptism. When situations call for stealth, said an ethereal voice, you may wish to invest in contact lenses. Dracula, said Adam, breathless with surprise. He whirled around, but could see no one. Is my host invisible? Or has my metamorphosis produced a telepathic link between us? Neither, said the fiend nocturnal, and in that moment the door behind him, whence came Dracula's voice, drifted open with a soft creak. You happen to have found my office and reading room. Come in, and stay a while, if you will. Adam was glad to. His entrance illuminated a space which had been black not long before. There at one end was Dracula, sitting at a principal-worthy desk, aboard the corners of which were short piles of books and a hilariously outdated globe. These, Adam remembered, had slid about the captain's quarters during the Cape Agulhas expedition, and now were put away at last. At the other end, extending into further dark, were bookcases of all manner of matters, though not deserving yet of much scrutiny, not while interpersonal study of vampiric matters was so high on Adam's agenda. Dracula looked tranquil, though a little flaky from yesterday's sunburns, and as Adam entered, he set down a novelette and folded his hands on the desk. I was hoping your baptism would end today, and it is well that you should find this room, for connected to it is a very special blood bank. Consider it your reward for being such a good sport with these sleepless nights. Who told you? His host guffawed. Was it obvious? It is done now, said Dracula with a wave-like flourish of his cape. Rest assured, your future will be more restful. Can I join? Said Alice, who had been there all along. Only now did Adam cast his eyes into the other side of the room, as if depth-sounding. There Alice sat, in human form, an atlas in her lap, and she glared at their lot with as much curiosity as when she had been their foe. Adam felt his heart beat. He became aware of a quiet jumble of conflicting voices within himself, the unsettled opinions concerning Alice. "I mean join you in the blood bank," she said, misconstruing this silence as confusion. "I was hoping," said Dracula, looking away, "that it might be a special, one-on-one moment." Alice stood upright, soldier-quick, and the atlas plopped to the floor. "Then I'll do what I can to prove that old adage, the more, the merrier." With an uncertain glance to Adam, Dracula declared, "Then it will be done," said the mummy. Proud, he was, to be her advocate. Few knew better of social awkwardness, after all. Dracula accepted this, and rose to lead them into the Carmine Crypt. When he removed a particular book from a shelf, it rumbled, and clouds of ancient dust rose from shaking crevices. With a slow spin, the bookcase revealed a passage space, heretofore unglimpsed. They stood at the precipice now, the dust settling betwixt their feet. A moment of quietude and awe might have transpired, had Alice not said, "Oh, bother. It just occurred to me that my presence here is a little suspicious." Dracula said, "What? How so? You really have no clue? Or are you just playing nice?" Before he could answer, she turned away, biting her lip. "For all you know, I could be a double agent, and what this room holds could be of value to the world government if nothing else, vital to stopping you." A moment of quietude and baffled deliberation passed. Then Dracula said, "Why on earth did you say that? What are you prompting me to do here, kick you out?" "I'm just informing you of the possibilities," she said, and her tone had scarcely changed, neither grown more guilty or sorrowful, nor risen to furor. "Oh, look," boomed Adam, throwing his voice into the chamber so that it produced an enticing echo, "such fascination ahead of us." The concrete floor, all cracked, suggested that none were to tread here, for fear of aching feet. A desk or table under a white cloth, along with various strange-shaped operati, stood in the center of the room. These were but distractions in the face of the chamber's impressive right wall, blood and vials, in rows, shimmering in their glasses like amber, each one underneath a different portrait done in charcoal sketch, and each labeled with its owner's name and vital statistics. Like a quilt, they filled the wall, making the room thick with history and sad essence of the dead. Almost all of the portrayed people were human. A few were werewolves, depicted in furred form. Adam's eyes, like mobile headlights, were torches that roved back and forth over their faces. They lingered, however, on the top left portrait, whose contents was Dracula, looking then as now. Then they rested on Igor, his face as lumpen as his back, looking eerie in the pencil's charcoal fog. Spellbound by the immensity, this record that could well have told of a millennium, and feeling his hunger for blood rev up like an angry lawnmower, Adam not only salivated, but also stammered, all these people." "Which people?" said Alice, for Dracula had assuaged the fears which Alice had projected onto him by blindfolding her and spinning her around 3 times. Now she would never know what secrets hid within. Unless somebody told her. The question caught Adam off guard, but he soon obliged. "Over there is Dracula, there must be Igor, and then, down the line, are specimens who are, if I may assume, unknown to you and I both." Dracula darted to the wall with an excitement not expressed in days. "There are stories here," he said grandsomely, "and not all ill-fated. This vial," he said, raising a tube from its stead beneath a crazed youth, "comes from a man named Renfield. I wronged him, making him a wretch, and that was years before I righted Igor, making him a wretch. We made up, however. Odd. Is he still alive? Perhaps, if there are still rats alive on this planet. He can only eat rats, you know. I am not certain whether he is alive or dead, for I have misplaced his phone number." Alice offered, "Shall I look him up in the phone book?" "Which phone book? There's only one now." "Oh, right. And what happened here?" intruded Adam, who now gestured to an empty portrait. It was probably blank, because Dracula had been lazy. "Ah, that is Griffin's. He is dead now. Interesting blood, that. He had the power to Despite his efforts, Adam's attention began to wander, caught up in the maelstrom of so many faces and the stories they carried. Dracula had lived a full life, eons long, in the shadow of which Adam, like a lowly mote of a firefly, winged his way. In that same shadow were many others, live and perished. What he felt was not belittlement so much as realization of his little status. This choked his heart, though selfish it may have been, their value was not mutual. Had it not been that way with Eve? In her gaze the greatest rejection, and in his a yearning, unshared? That was a fine story, Dracula, said Alice, and Adam had to pause, for it was the kindest thing he had heard her say. But can you tell me what's under my hand right now? Adam pulled his focus to the peculiar flat object in the center of the room which, as indicated, was shrouded in mothball cloth. Alice's hand, blinded and feely, was set on the top. That is a sort of white tablecloth, repurposed, said Dracula. Not exactly the answer I wanted, said Alice. Dracula came into the center with her. Oh, you mean this? He cried, and he flung the cloth clear away, revealing something that shocked Adam so utterly that for almost a minute he was without words. I do mean that, said Alice, but I'm blindfolded, you see. Oh. Well, it is an operating table, though I am afraid it is fairly ordinary, if dramatically last season. Come to think of it, such a table may have been in use when you were a child. Twitches overcame Adam's body, numerous as hives and goosebumps. He gritted his teeth, his fine-tuned fangs. This was Igor's operating room in former centuries. His patients begged him to reverse their maladies, werewolfism being the most frequent. How loud they cried! Adam wrung his hands, rubbed his wrists and arms, to keep himself from anything stranger, more instinctual or more foul. I have no use for this table, except as a twisted memento. It has laid witness to more tragedies than successes, and may actually be a lodestone bringing bad luck upon the castle. Should you care to keep it for yourself, Alice, as an antique souvenir, I would not mind at all. In fact, I invite such a thing. No thanks. No nostalgia for me. I try to keep moving forward, as they say. Ha, 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 oh my, oh no. Adam, good man, what is the matter? Dracula entreated, for Adam had fallen to his knees, his claws become nails across his forehead, threatening puncture, and he wailed now, overcome. Dracula flew to Adam and laid a hand on his back, but that could not stymie his continual shaking, nor the words climbing in volume. Neither could it stop those words from stumbling out of coherence. For example, did you bring me here just to torment me with items from Igor's life which coincidentally mirror items from my own, as well as my maligned creators, and all this after I suffered a nightmare about the same, which I can near about handle as a memory, but not so much as a physical thing in front of me morphed into a growl of, I Igor. Yellow-gray papyrus whipped out, sweeping the table off its feet, and the crash seemed to split the room in two, so deafening and metallic it was. There was unholy resonance in it, a resonance that reached into past and future, and Adam would not let it stalk him to the end of days. Alice flattened herself against the wall, and Dracula flinched, and all went still except Adam's head, the interior of it, a whirligig of thoughts all screaming and bright. Adam, Dracula managed, you are an original. You are no replacement, Igor, is that what this is about? But Adam was not listening to Dracula, and if he had, he would have considered the point sorely missed. Keep moving forward, he whispered in a serpent's hiss. Move back. Find her, be alone, find someone. I've got it, said Alice with a snap of her fingers. You can marry me. A grave groan erupted from Adam's core, such that the chamber literally rattled, and thunder was heard to boom. But it was merely hunger. Thus Adam remembered the world. The competing voices within him began folding into themselves, and he, knowing now what he had done, folded himself, became a ball, like the scarab, unassuming. Forgive me, was all he could say. Forgive me, forgive me. Dracula unfurled Adam's hand and slid in a vial of ordinary blood. Easily, he said. What should have followed was a 2-hour session of Adam explaining the demons that now assailed him, some of a known and memory-oriented character, and others, only revealed to him minutes ago, of a psychological character, those being the whirligig of voices not his own and yet his own, the confusion that refused to resolve itself into one clear opinion. Unfortunately, this did not follow, and nothing of the kind was explained, for in that moment Dracula's pocket watch vibrated, signaling an alarm, and, with a frightful start, he discovered that it had been vibrating for a while now, maybe as long as 2 minutes. "I'm late," he said. "I'm late," she gasped. "Gulp," said Adam as he downed the blood. And then they were down the hall, those two, Dracula and retired Commander Alice, almost too quick for Adam to catch them leaving for their enigmatic appointment. Leaving him alone, crouched next to the rubble. He dimmed his eyes in the solitude, the lamps died out like stage light over the closing act. It was not Igor whom he feared he might become, and not even Victor neither anymore. But these were stories eaten through with rejection, irreconcilable. He feared not to become, but to remain, and he wondered, with his roundabout mind, just how kin became enemies, and why his Eve should run. The north was frozen. White winds held forever. Frost so icy it burned stormed cacophonous above the broken flows that filled the landscape, if one could call it that. The only man alive fool enough to rest in such a world was Frankenstein's monster, sewn together from cadaverous flesh a mere year ago. Such was the land in which he set himself on fire. First he set free the dogs who had pulled his sledge to this sorry apex of the world. Then he shredded his sledge, to build his pyre. The body of his creator he laid far away, as if to keep him safe, to keep him as an audience, so he might watch and laugh at the suicide of his abomination. Once the monster set the wood alight, he observed his creation, bathing in the blazing glow in posture of prayer, as if at the altar. Then he stepped in. Here leaped the monster, anticipating only release, from this searing pain, and then from pain of life. Soon to come was the end of everything, of suffering, of self-pity, and, most anticipated of all, of loneliness. And yet the white skies turned to sapphire, and sapphire to slate. Through a shimmering crimson curtain, the monster watched the accents of the tundra shift in creeping change, all without him. Was his skin really burning? He could not discern. Curse the science-born body, impossible strength. Regardless, he could not step out. This was his desire, his oath, and his punishment, they were one and the same. To leave the flames alive would be blasphemy on his last vestiges of human honor. 3 days later, the last embers blew out. Now the monster lay on his knees in a pile of blackened splinters. Muscles and arteries worked and pumped beneath his wan skin, the same as ever. His grayish eyes saw morning light. This creature's death had been a resounding failure. "Oh," he screamed, overcome with disgust. "I see your game, Victor. You curse me from beyond the grave with foul life. How dare you torture me with a life so atrocious as to grant me no pleasure forevermore? You truly were the genius of the age, and you have taken all your secrets with you to your frozen grave. Why, oh, why did I become so presumptuous as to dare hold your life in my own mangled hands? To burn on and on, for a 3-day eternity, was only the prelude to the true penance for the crime of birth, was it not, you accursed?" With a glance, he finally noted the absence of the scientist's body, and the presence of the sled dogs he had freed. The dogs padded closer, tongues lolling. They had waited here all along, surviving on hardy rabbits and the monster's provisions. They seemed untroubled. "This result is equally unfortunate, for how can a canine troop help me to burn?" said the monster to himself. "Although I suppose if a man, nay, creature so hated by the fates has allowance as to superstition, if in fact mine true punishment is to survive, then survive I may by the grace of these hounds." He raised his head to the sky. "This is my decision, as an atom forsaken by his creator. These beasts shall help me in my new occupation of leaving the North Pole, perchance for Eden." The dogs rolled their eyes, despite not understanding human speech. The monster, now deeming himself Adam, lurched forward onto his hands, then clambered upright. He stretched out 3 days' worth of static heat and proceeded on a journey to, firstly, Victor Frankenstein's sled, abandoned weeks prior. 1 month later, the dogs had marched Adam's stolen sled through Siberia to the outskirts of a sleepy Russian village in the dead of night. Adam unhitched the dog team and brusquely tossed the leashes into the sea of trees. "And now I declare you animals free of my command. No beast should deign ownership of another, for I liken myself to a beast rather than a man, the latter being of finer looks and morals. Live long, and may you chew many bones." One by one, the dogs left him to his solitude, and eventually were adopted into various wolf packs. They became renowned among their peoples for incredible survival instincts, and most became not only alphas, but wolf legends to be held of for centuries. Possibly even for 1,000 years. They did not appear, however, in the novel, Call of the Wild, for they were not wolf dogs of the Americas. Adam, chilly but not cold, headed into the town and its snowy Novemberscape, careful to tread light and hide his face. Not a soul was outside, but who could be watching from dark windows, the cracks in walls? It never hurt to be cautious. He caught a whiff of something delectable and, after a solid month of hand-caught fish, the desire for varietous meals overcame him. Though subject to misery for the crime of living, stealing chances to live above his means would be his way of thumbing his nose at the heaven that was mankind as he forever prowled the side streets. Past a small crop of houses lied a large bag of bread outside the town's bakery. To his delight, Adam found not a one of those loaves to be more than a few days stale. They were cold, many soaked with wet snow dust, but they were the most delicious breads Adam had ever tasted. The flavor of wheat shocked his taste buds and shook his brain. That sensation alone roused his spirit from a dark slumber. He had figuratively been asleep for a very long time now. That night, that moment, tears poured from his dead eyes. "It is so delicious," he sniveled through his hot breath. "Tonight, I live again." A lantern flickered to life inside of the baker's house. The baker's wife poked out the door, wooden curlers in her hair. "Hey, you freako," she shouted in Russian. "Get out. Get out of that raccoon bread." Adam hissed with fright and fled into the night. Then the baker himself rushed to his wife's side and questioned, in Russian, "Why, my dear? Whatever is the matter at this late hour we are currently in?" It was a rather disgusting man rummaging through our breads. "We leave those out for random forest creatures to sloppily eat, bothering our neighbors, not for one of those heavily scarred, ratty-haired, sea mussels through their skin hobos." The baker slapped both hands to his cheeks with terror. "That was no hobo," he explained, in Russian. "That was a monster." News of this monster sighting engulfed the continent at an alarming rate. In mere weeks, numerous hunters set out to try their hand at catching the gross man-shaped creature crisscrossing the Crimean Peninsula to make a name for themselves, but no matter the traps and no matter their mettle, with one flash of that Frankenstein face, every one of them either fled or fainted. When interviewed after a failed expedition in Thessaly, one man claimed, "I was gonna catch him. I really was. But or blimey, he was just too blasted ugly." Adam's trek through the forests and mountains of Europe came to a brief stop upon part of the Scottish Isles, known as the Orkneys. It was a journey undertaken on a stolen boat, via which one may hypothetically escape a sinking ship. He had come to sate a somewhat perverse whim. Much time had passed since his first trip to the Orkneys, the island where Victor Frankenstein had assembled his final project. This was where Victor had begun, and destroyed, Adam's bride-to-be. The isle was scarcely inhabited and contained barely enough pasture to feed its 5 odd peoples. 3 small huts dotted this space, one of which had been left untouched, with the absence of Victor, former lodger. He had renovated extensively, filling it with splendid furniture. And yet, to Adam's amazement, the village left all the riches alone, as if minding a curse. Further, the jars and tanks of organs and limbs inside the hut had been left just as Adam had last seen them, and the same went for the womanly parts strewn all across the room, the body of the fair Frankenstein whom Victor had so violently rejected. All untouched, all of it. Had even the rats avoided this dwelling? Abominable Adam searched that hut for any possessions that might have proven useful to his current enterprise, a pale parody of his creator's own. To his bewilderment, there in dust sat the entire collection of Victor's notes, all the knowledge required to revive a composite corpse, to animate this patchwork maid who had never been born. Shuddering with the possibilities and new future swirling round his being, he carefully lifted the disembodied head of his female duplicate and wiped the dirt from her face. Her hair was wavy, flowy, and lustrously black, with a single eclectic strip of white dashing from root to tip. Her teeth were of a pearly white, her eyes watery and gray, their sockets dun. The lips, black and straight, seemed now to smile. By no conventional means could that face be described as beauteous or at all fine. Staring into those blank eyes, however, such a one as Adam felt only adoration. This was truly the woman with the power to grant him contentment, his double, his pride, his wife. All of that so long confined to this room, frozen in time, thanks to Victor Frankenstein's greatest act of spite. But never again shall I have to rely on Victor Frankenstein to grant me happiness, declared Adam. With myself as my witness, I, Adam, hereby declare my full intention to play scientist. Thunder cracked and spooked 2 of the local cows. The first step in his plan to manufacture happiness was to fit himself with a scientific white long coat and snap-on surgical gloves. Then he cracked open a diary and got to memorizing the facts of these peculiar life sciences. In due time, he gained an understanding of the operati and tools and boxes around the hut, and within weeks his research was complete. Next he sewed the pieces of Victor's second creation together, injecting her body with compounds and chemicals in their proper measures. Then the fateful night dawned, or dusked. Small electrodes were attached to her body at vital points and junctures, and fingers of lightning danced in the Scottish clouds, preluding descent of heaven's touch. His Eve, clad in the most gorgeous wedding gown he could steal, lied on a metal bed. Hotly anticipated hours slid by on the greased sidewalk of glee, and then the work was made complete with a skyclap, a touch of the kite tied to the roof, a shock of ether bottled in her form. At long, long last, the bride of Frankenstein's design rose upright on the work table. By the glimmer of lamplight, she opened the eyes beneath that white veil. Adam, as he approached her, was cordial, as if greeting an exalted minister, though his feelings were tender and warm. He pulled the veil apart and beamed at her. "Welcome," he greeted, "to the world of the live dash. She screeched and pushed him away. Then she vomited embalming fluid all over the floor, scrambled to the wall, kicked a hole through it with incredible strength, and jogged out into the Orkneyan countryside. Oh, horror of all horrors! The first reaction of the love of his life was one of utter and absolute revulsion. To him she was more gorgeous than any Mona Lisa, more comely than the most armless statue of Venus. Yet to her, he was naught but a Frankenstein's monster. His grayish heart wept, and sought sad comfort in painful resignation. His knees buckled, seeking only surrender. But the mind reasoned with the body to keep it from breaking, and extended a hand to the heart. Adam told himself, no. This reaction is only natural, but it can be unlearned. She is but a babe in the wood who has as much knowledge of this world as I after mine own birth, just as skittish as a young Adam, who only learned proper speech by way of stalking an unfortunate home for months and months, who came to understand his own misfortunate appearance by way of repeated misfortunes. If I could only stay her course, follow her every move and watch as she matures in the way I did. Then perhaps she will come to see herself in myself, just as I see myself in her. All hope is not lost, Adam Paradise still exists. Follow that babe." As he prepared to chase, the hut's actual, non-hole door swung open, and in flew a silver cross, which landed directly upon Adam's shoulder and bounced to the floor. Adam did not turn to face the cross-tosser, he only took a step toward Eve's improvised exit. "Begone, villager. Myself hath none timery for game sense," he blathered. He took a second step, and a clove of garlic tied to a wooden stake rebounded off his powerful back. "Curses! He is a strong one," decided a grizzled murmur. "If silver crosses do not work, then perhaps a rifle and a silver ball, all anointed with holy water." The round embedded itself in Adam's flesh with a smarting bite, and he jumped, shouting, "Yippee-ki-yay!" He spun toward the door and cried, "Whosoever you be, in your attempt to slay me, I hereby declare thee to be foolish fool of all fools. Leave me be. I must track down the single happiness that remains in my sorrowful existence. Now I am off, before she escapes my sight, to protect my future of love and belovedness. Cease your long-windedness, vampire." Another silver ball was fired. This one struck wretched Adam between the eyes, infecting his vision with a persistent white flash. "My vision," cried Adam. He could barely divine the form of his three assailants as they entered the room: Abraham Van Helsing with his gnarly rifle, Mary Wollstonecraft Goodwin Shelley, and Percy Bysshe Shelley. "You got him, I wager." Percy cheered. "Wait one moment, Van Helsing," cautioned Mary. "This is no vampire. He be of human flesh, though the flesh of the undead either way." "I see," said Abe V. H. "Then indeed this is the beast seen traipsing across the whole of Eurasia. I have misinterpreted the reports. This is no vampire side hunt, it is our man-creature main hunt. But how, then, to kill this monstrosity?" Percy panicked. "We prepared for a ghoul, not an ugly, freakishly ugly abominable that's no man uggo. We cannot do it, we simply can not." Van Helsing responded by shooting Adam once again. He wailed. "Both of you, please stand down for a moment," requested Mary. "If this truly be the monster of Frankenstein I met 1 year ago, that means we have unfinished business. You disgusting untruth of a man. You gave your word that you would have yourself burned away in the northern wastes, yet here you stand, indulging in the joys of science. What excuse have you, who so cling to life like a cowardly infant to his mother's breast?" Adam rubbed his eyes, as if that might clear away the migrainous flashes. "I recognize that somewhat mannish and sailor-like yet womanly voice. It is the voice of the lady who disguised as a man on that fateful voyage." Now he faced her. "Were you not on that boat I came across on the day of Victor's passing? In that case, I shall divulge to you the true history elapsed since that event, and then hastily escape to the love of my life. I have burned to death. I sat in a fire of my own machination for 3 days and again 3 nights, yet this flesh refuses all attempts to burn away. And so, seeing this agonizing misfortune as yet another Frankenstein curse, I clung to this unpassing life as to a witch mother, like a child whose every joy is but a trick or trifle, every joy but this." He flung his arm toward Eve's passageway. "My search for meaning has." Mary wrenched the gun from the Van Helsing's hands and shot Adam in the shoulder. "Ugh! Mine connector betwixt arm and chest." She shot him again, in the other shoulder. "Consarn you, why must you interrupt me at any turn of phrase?" The trigger clicked to no avail, yet Mary, swallowed by horror and irritation, kept pulling. "Curses! This gun is out of ammunition and he simply will not cease talking. Not to worry, love." Percy tossed another clove of garlic at Adam's face with a flunk. "We've quite established he is no vampire, Percy dear." Not to worry. Abe Van Helsing now had 2 pistols. He lacerated Adam's face, blasting through with bullet after bullet, until Adam finally rushed out of that hole, ammo nicking his ankle as he ran. The further he ran across the Highland hills, the more his vision returned to him, the better to see his despair, to know that his bride was no longer in sight. Face dripping blood, he raced to the opposite coast, and stopped. No boats did he spot in the dark of this eve, nor could any swimmers be heard overlapping high tide. "I have done nothing but loose another sorry creature unto this world," he reflected somberly. Shame took the place of infatuation in his heart. He was no noble Adam taming the wilderness with his wife. He was just another Frankenstein. And he had not outdone Victor. In fact, he newly understood, with a pang of dread sympathy, why Victor had stopped short and dared destroy his bride, though it had brought Adam's wrath upon his head and ensured the demise of both. His reflection halted as bullets whizzed past his head. "Darn these guns! Why must they be so inaccurate from a distance?" complained Van Helsing. "If the creation of a monster should be such a sin as to add to my life sentence, Adam decreed to himself, then these experienced hunters must be my just deserts, my last supper before true execution. Then he turned to the oppressors. Fie on thee, I say. Come and chase this gross criminal. I shall raise the stakes for you, and cling to life with the very last of my strength. I hope you have made final preparations, for this is a journey that will drag us all to the very ends of the earth. I can still hear him ramble on. He's close. Oops. Adam swan dove into the raging sea and began the greatest adventure never told, which spanned years and continents, and was perfect for filling a novel far more interesting than Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus. In the early morning hours of July 3, 3001, a strange object dropped from the sky and landed off the coast of the most important city in the world, New York, D.C. Matter-sensing radars and satellites detected a tiny rubber object attached to some organic material, and thereafter the object was explained as a toy that had been scooped up by a hurricane or storm, tossed about, and sent on a return trip to Earth, picking up a couple of dead insects along the way. However, some of the coastal radars were visual, capturing photographs and videos of the Atlantic shoreline and all that landed therein. No doubt one employee, at least, noticed that no machine had managed to snap a photo of this object. One received proof of a splash in the water at the right time and in the right place, a splash caused, according to footage, by nothing. To ascertain the true nature of this wrongly identified falling object, we must go back in time a space to a slightly earlier morning hour, or, rather, a morning minute, for the fall of the Wifo was swift. It was then that Dracula and Alice hurried to the castle's garage, where a big orange raft from the camping room had been set before the door and between two interesting cars that, sadly, were too disrepairsome to use during this adventure. The cars also could not travel through watery sewers, detracting further from their utility. Dracula jabbed a button on the wall, the garage door began to roll up, and whipping winds from the indigo sky lashed the hem of his cape. "Ready?" he shouted over the gale and the door's mechanical moan. "Almost," assured Alice. In her hand was a glass bottle of drink with a tag around the lip which read, "Drink me." This "drink me" drink, combined with her "eat me" eats, rounded out her arsenal of stealth-helping japes. By drinking the drink, she could shrink, by eating the treat, she grew feet of height. These elements were a secret rarely shared, and not just to hide them from potential robbers. She was a little ashamed of them, for they came from Wonderland, and she had tried for so long not to admit the usefulness of the irrational. She uncorked the drink, then opened the valve of the raft and gave it a good sip's worth. Soon she and Dracula would take their own sips, allowing them to enter NYDC somewhat inconspicuously. But one problem remained, with all the futuristic security about, namely the high-definition cameras. How could they infiltrate without being seen for who they were, albeit at confusing, mouse-like size? The answer came from the Castlebat Bistrits, who maintained a power heretofore hidden from readers. At the anointed moment, Dracula gave a stern eek, which was the cue for Bistrits to become invisible. Not incorporeal, merely undetectable to eyes both mortal and dash. As he faded, so too did his passengers and innards, and in this way Dracula and Alice became as close to undetectable as possible, as they would remain for precious minutes longer. So the tiny raft riders dropped for many thousands of feet, perchance to plunge, their vehicle flopping end over end. So they fell into mourning as the sun threatened rise. But Bistrits would not keep flying by, as was his wont and habit. He would have to make landfall soon in the heart of enemy territory. Mere minutes before, in those same early morning hours of July 3, 3001, in that time that was as good as night, somewhere in Bistrits' castle back, Adam, standing solitary in the chamber of blood and operations and failure, gathered his bearings. A few moments alone, as it turned out, were all he had needed to fully recall his nightmare. The final puzzle piece that made his past. It was not such a devastating thing, not any more since he had relived it night after night. It was less of a stab in the chest, and more of an albatross, there on the neck to hang for all his years. He did not take more vials from the wall, he did not want to chance it, for without Dracula's help he was not certain how many contained the werewolf blood he now pledged to avoid. So when he left, traversed the castle, and opened the door to the pilot's cabin, he remained nearly as dizzy as he had been upon waking. But despite Adam's assumption, Dracula had not come here with Alice. Instead, Trials was the current captain, sitting on top of the wheel quite casually, not even facing the window. There was a dead bird in her mouth. She dropped it at the sight of him. "What's got you down in the dumps? You look like something I dragged in like that bird." "Apologies." "What's with you and apologies?" "Apologies," he rectified, too. "Your ears for the words they hear, Trials. I am weak, just a touch weak. Would you like a bit of bird blood?" Do not mind if I do." He bent to collect the bird, and he fought an urge to cradle it. Outside the window was nothing but indigo, the stars having faded with the slow march of dawn. "Do you happen to know where Count Dracula has gone?" "Don't you? Oh, right, you must have been asleep when we had that meeting. He's about to jump." "Jump? What madness is this?" But this inquiry took Adam no further. No sooner was it loosed from his lips than Bistritz began to tilt downward. Trials, treading along the edge of the wheel to spin it, was bringing them slowly into a nosedive, which was bizarre, considering the wheel could only turn left and right. Adam fell against the wall, and the bird flew from his mitts. Trials, however, remained standing on the wheel despite her precarious angle, and the diving bat, thanks not to some natural cat-like balance, but to the balance talent's salad spell. Then the window became the floor, and Adam thunked against the glass, almost through it. He watched in terrified, terrific awe as Bistritz flew through the clouds like an arrow, cottony grays bursting against the clear surface. And Adam could not tear himself away from the sight of a city from a bat's eye view. You will recall that Adam had rarely chanced to see an airplane, let alone peer out from the window of one. For him, the shock of seeing a city in lights from above was doubtless far greater than you, dear reader, can imagine. At least that is true for me. You cannot even guess how many flyer miles I have. New York D.C., across seemingly every inch, blazed yellow, pink, blue, all bubblegum colors that burned dark streets and trees into oblivion, so that they were only the faintest traces of ash. Even the brown house, lump of dark fur, was swamped by lamplight. Adam and Trials had no chance of mapping the city even if they tried. Adam flung his head to the cat, his message for her delivered by scream. "Trials. Surely we'll crash. Surely they'll see us. No airstrip? No problem." He replied, "What is an airstrip?" But even if he had known what was an airstrip, he would have pointed out the remaining visibility issue. That, too, was no problem, for in an instant Trials disappeared before his eyes. The walls and wheel disappeared before the same eyes. The window had been transparent to start with, so it maintained its former appearance. Adam disappeared too, in case you were wondering. Bistritz, and all grateful to inhabit his gracious back, had gone invisible. But still, but yet and still, they hurtled, and Adam swore he could feel wind pricking past him in a mortifying rush as they plummeted ever closer, the lights becoming lamps among hard roofs that would not be kind to bone. This behemoth bat was the second strange object to land in New York, D.C. That morning, and unlike Dracula and Alice, he went totally undetected, falling, as he did, in a low-priority area for security and its radars. When the bat was just moments away from colliding headfirst with Alice's penthouse, Robert, seated bravely in the corner of his mouth, fed him a measure of the drink-me potion. Thus Bistritz shrank and, moving like a hook, curved sideward and upward on a dime, through the sliver crack underneath the penthouse door. Giving Adam the fright of his life, I might add. Trials would explain their invisibility, their minuscule size, and their plan, however loose and half-formed, quite soon. But right now, in the quiet of their landing, she looked across the vast veldt that was Alice's wooden floor and purred with valiant anticipation. The time had come. The trumpets of war had sounded, the olive branches of peace, now raised. Emerge, you warriors, from a bat into hell. All to the kennel, now prepared, if need be, to pound the dogs. Rare is the werewolf who fears the sun. In former years, 'twas the moon they hated, for the full moon not only changed their bodies, but made them feral, replete with undirected wrath made them worse than wolves, for a wolf has its honor, and a wolf has a pack, there to share in sorrow and victory alike. Who would lick the werewolf's wounds? Who, what friend when the lunar madness struck, and when the home, with its fruits of domesticity, was torn to shreds and memory, what friend would stay for the werewolf? What friend would dare stay, risking their own mutilation? A happy sun spread its arms across the horizon to embrace New York, D.C., for the city too busy to sleep, too busy to hate, that dared not stop, claimed never to close its eyes. Igor was the werewolf's second friend, for the sun had always been their first, there to dab the eye when they mourned the victims of their own lunacy. The sun was progress like the new invention, but while daylight was a temporary cure, Igor's proudest medical finding was a permanent one. The public did not know whether or not werewolfism could be reversed. To call it a cure was outdated terminology, but the madness that came with moonbeams was the true plague, and had been eradicated. The sun did not reserve itself for the glimmering city alone. It shone alike on tower and sewer, and it is on a stretch of the latter's murky water, passing over ground for an unattractive stretch and made almost pretty by yellow rays, that we turn our attention. Roving between the rapids that were NYDC's discard, on a river of every color and substance, frequently drenched in the refuse, and wielding tiny makeshift oars which were really popsicle sticks, were tiny Dracula and Alice on their tiny raft. The former had bound himself from head to foot in black bandages to save him from the sun, which showered werewolves with tenderness, but showed most vampires only enmity. The bindings did not save him from the horrible garbage smell, though. Fortunately, their raft came ashore under a humble bridge made of holosteel, a material which could never be dirted and, when there was any light at all, contently twinkled diamundi. This gave them shelter as they nibbled portions of the edamame cakes and shot up to normal height. The raft and oars they left to drift on with the other trash. Now Dracula ripped the bandages away and cast them into a briefcase which Alice had brought here, fed, and made to grow. Under his wrappings were civilian clothes befitting a tourist, Walter's sneaks, custom jean shorts, and a floral shirt vaguely suggestive of island sojourns. Similarly, Alice tossed her nasty long coat away, along with her army fatigues, underneath which was as bland a shirt and pants combo as can be imagined. For the brief moment during which Alice removed her shades to clean them, Dracula looked her in the eyes and thanked her. The holosteel walls were like a jewelly cavern, winking. She tossed him a mini-moon, delicately white, and it jumped into orbit beside his brow. He began to jog in place, accelerating the werewolf power. Then Alice gave herself a moon, and in an instant her human self was gone. While he exercised, she said, "Remember, until we hit the brown house tomorrow, nobody can know who we are. Out here we whisper, always. And try your absolute darndest not to speak to others." Though these tips repeated what he had long known and practiced, Dracula thanked her again. Now that both were Lupin, it was clear that they still smelled like pits of wet nasty garbage. "No problem," Alice set a perfume bottle on the grass, poured some drink me into it, and a moment before it grew, she said, "Hop in." Dracula is not the only teller of tales around here. Not long before, Alice had shared with him the history of their next teammate, but, as she can be kind of a bland storyteller, I take it upon myself to share it now in her stead. Have you heard of Project Rainbow, also known as the Philadelphia Experiment? If so, I am not sure whether to be pleasantly charmed by your broad breadth of historical knowledge, or tearfully empathetic, for you know something of war and woe. During World War II, American military personnel decided that if they could perfect cloaking technology, hiding their ships from all manner of detection, they would take a giant leap toward ending the fight. Such was the goal of Project Rainbow. The cloaking technology was tested on a single warship off the coast of Virginia, resulting in the ship's complete and utter disappearance, and its subsequent reappearance near Philadelphia. By some marvelous accident of technological imperfection, it had teleported hundreds of miles away. Not only that, during the event, many of the crewmates aboard found themselves able to walk through walls, equipment, anything at all, as if it were thin air. Tragically, as a result of walking wantonly through walls, many of these people became stuck inside as the ship and its people re-became corporeal. One man, however, fell off deck into the ocean. Even such a one as Dracula shuddered to think who this sad son of a scientific gaffe might possibly be. An oceanic specter, walking through water and walls with equal ease? Some hybrid creature in the Chthonian mold? Or possibly something with jaws? A shark, mayhaps? Put yourself in the shoes of a werewolf trickster, a trespasser who has come after hours to the most impressive zoo on Earth. You have come to the edge of a tank, you kneel, and the mini-moon sets a light into the tide. There is a predator lurking underneath. He smells you, but he does not hunger for your flesh. When he looks up at you, he sees it, the graphic on your t-shirt, the promise, elusive, of a burger. The graphic is a post-ironic statement on the American dream, but he knows little beyond war and hunger. You are not long for this planet now. The predator races like a submarine missile, with his eponymous jaws spread wide. His mighty back fin cuts the waters, and thrashing just as furiously come his human legs. There was something about the sea animal trainer at the Supranational Zoo. Dracula could tell that immediately, even from such a great distance, from his spot among this anxious crowd of quotidian werewolves. This despite the fact that the trainer herself was a werewolf, outwardly identical to the rest. He knew it would be suspicious to watch her, so he focused, as well as he could, on the pool of water she idled next to. They had 5 minutes before the delightfully named New York DC Ultramarine Fun in the Sun Rockin' Sea Bash began. The trainer examined her bucket of fish. He was glad to have a confidant. That werewolf is not training mindless drones, he whispered to Alice. They had added floppy sun hats to their outfits, which helped, a bit, to shield Dracula from the sun. These so-called creatures, penned up in their tank, these are people. How can I not have known this was happening in the world capital? Had you heard of this zoo? Asked Alice. Yes, of course. What did you think they kept here? He thought this question over. Having traveled directly from the sea to sewer pipes and then to backways in the zoo's underground tunnels, and up a stairwell to merge into this crowd, he had no sense whatever of how the zoo actually looked. Finally, he coughed out a laugh. Is this a trick question? He said. They keep nothing but the most exotic creatures they can get their hands on. Correction, nothing but the most exotic and dangerous animals they can get their hands on. That's the real reason why Jaw and countless other cryptids are imprisoned here. Dracula huffed. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer, indeed. But look in the water. He raised his head above shoulders to peer in with his special eyes. He expected to see Jaw, that very striking great white shark. During Project Rainbow, a shark and a soldier fused into one and developed other strange secrets and powers. At the very least, Dracula expected the distinctive doughboy helmet that, according to Alice, crowned his head to the present day, a constant companion in front of his dorsal fin. But all he saw was that trainer kneeling to feed a hairy man in the water. A wolf man. A snarl of disgust overcame Dracula. He struggled to keep his complaints to whispers. Werewolves coming in droves, to see werewolves. So this is how much they hate us, hate to look at us, how much they hate anyone not like them. He hissed to Alice, no offense. Oh, I understand, she said. They refused to look at me, too, until I gave in to the treatment. It's most illogical, until you get into studying modern werewolf psychology. I have some good books on that, if you're interested. I would rather endure your 57th Wonderland Chronicle. She shrugged as if to say, suit yourself. In any case, what's important to note is that that's not any old wolf. That's Jaw. Dracula blinked. He blinked again. See that doughboy helmet? You are serious, he said. And she was. Quite a strange change to us, but a natural one to the 31st century werewolves who witnessed it had swept the planet's biggest cities about 20 years prior to Dracula and Alice's day at the zoo. Werewolves, ever more disgusted with non-wolvian forms, had started to shun animals. The goose, the rat, the giraffe, the python, and even the startlingly werewolf-like dog and its ilk, their endlessly diverse shapes, all had to go. And they did go, city by city, town by town. Soon, it was hoped, when vaccine production and finances allowed, the beasts of the wilderness would be made just as lycanthropine. All the animals here were werewolves. Dracula was overcome by this revelation, shell-shocked. The last vestige of color would have drained from his face, were he not himself a wolf. Which fact in itself was now mortifying. So the werewolf from a minute ago, who tried to suck my arm. That was a mosquito, Alice answered, deadpan. Dracula was scared. He could not believe he was scared. He, the Count, the King of the Night, former tyrant of terror? Scared by the multiplication of pups? What a joke, he would have said moments before. Not on your life, he'd have jeered to the jester. But he had underestimated the human ego. He snapped, put my mind on something else. Okay. How about the trainer? Yes. Good choice. The trainer, gussied up in an old-fashioned striped swimsuit. There was some strength and royalty about her, as if she believed the world was hers, as if the world agreed. That's Helen. Which one? The voice on the other end of your wrist communicator, or? They're the same person. Another shock. All the same, he breathed. That is Helen? The Helen? The First Lady, reduced first to your operator, and then to feeding fish? That is, reduced to feeding our fellow creaturemen, who in her eyes are merely fish? The way she sees it, it's not reducing herself at all, informed Alice. The First Lady likes to have her hands in every level of the city. Everything she does seems to be what she wants to do, and is a hit with everyone, young and old, rich and poor. Once she toured with a traveling circus, didn't you hear? Just because she wanted to do it. Igor didn't mind. It helped that circus profits in any given area had a direct, positive correlation to his approval rating that month. And she is not our next teammate? Not at all. She's too loyal to Igor and to the city. Dracula nodded in acceptance. It is said, he recalled, that Helen is the strongest werewolf woman in the world. Any truth to this? But Alice was surprised. I've never heard that. Sure, she works out, but the strongest? Perhaps the only strong thing about her, Dracula said loftily, is her approval rating. Far ahead, First Lady Helen rose with a fish in her hand. Jaw the Wolfman, totally average, if naked, leaped from the waters to snap it up. Dracula's heart went out to him, not just to him as a shark transformed, but as a man transformed. A man who had liked hamburgers, who missed them so much that, as Alice had recounted, he devoured an innocent in an attempt to eat the mirage on their t-shirt. He and Alice had agreed, however, not to free him yet. They were here to stake out the place, nothing more. Yet the cogs did whirl in Dracula's wizened head, and they scraped against the bedrock of limited patience. They had only one day left, after all. When the two of them separated, shuffling through the crowd to stand at the far left and far right of the audience, the cogs only turned quicker, the smoke of thought driven by unstoppable sympathy rising. He could not help but conceive a plan. Shark, hamburger. Shark, hamburger. Hamburgers, cried a convenient voice not 2 feet away. A werewolf vendor, cart-bound, peddling edibles. Wolf burgers. Get your wolf burgers here. Now the plan began to sizzle. Barely a second later, First Lady Helen corralled the crowd's attention. Wolf ladies, werewolf gentlemen, and all other werewolf parties, she announced, I now present our city's finest attraction, the New York DC Ultramarine Fun in the Sun Rockin' Sea Bash. Starring the Loch Ness Monster. She held a hula hoop before her, a dutiful werewolf bounced out of the water and arced through it. The audience hooped. And jaw. I could do that, said one wolf to his wife, but I'm still impressed because it's the Loch Ness Monster. Ah, so Jaw was an accessory to the star attraction, as were Big Samuel the killer whale, Dorcas the blue whale, and that charming pink dolphin of the Amazon, Silly Martha. As these animals performed flips under Helen's guiding hand and the guise of wet werewolves, Dracula whispered an apology under his breath to Alice for breaking from the plan to watch and wait. As it turned out, the possible double agent nervous to disprove her double agentness was not the first to violate the trust between them. Then he snapped his fingers and went invisible. Wolf burgers, howled the Burgermeister. Get your aroo? One of his burger bags opened and its sandwich drifted out, evidently of its own accord. But it was all Dracula's accord, for the mist could move light objects. "Hey," screeched the vendor at this invisible hand of commerce. "At least leave a tip, you ghostly hooligan." Luckily, Dracula had the forethought to take $10 from his pocket when he transformed, and these he placed on the burger cart, but the dollars, sadly, were invisible, and the good marketeer never saw payment. They also dissolved completely, being mist. Dracula and the burger wafted high on the wind. He may have been see-through, but the burger, the drippy grease now splashing on some poor tourist's head, and Jaws' nostalgia for bygone days were thoroughly opaque. Helen saw the flying burger and knew it was trouble. She dropped her arms, stood stock still, and her eyes widened. Everyone? We're having technical difficulty. A single head splashed out of the water. A head with a doughboy helmet. The audience, just as stunned, followed Jaws' gaze to a burger that was levitating and rising even higher. How could those commoners have known that what cradled the burger was both a wolfman and the vampire to end all vampires? The mist held that burger proudly, and its Transylvanian voice, undisguised, said, "Yes, my friend, come and get it." Screams, like streamers and confetti, popped loose. Firecracker feet, running scared. The crowd tried to disperse, but the crowd got in the crowd's own way, and none could escape fast enough. They tripped, fell, crawled, stampeded, because jaw like a jet from the water launched straight into Dracula's meal. No rocket's red glare, just the grease busting in air, grease pelting the people like a shower of burning truth, as Jaw writhed in the sky, scarfing down the treat long forbidden him. Wolfing it down? No, for he was no wolf in spirit. He was a shark-blooded American in a world where virtue was rare, but now that Dracula was on the case, well done. Incredibly, the shark, with no help from Dracula, remained airborne and nearly stationary, beyond his not blood but burger-thirsty thrashing. Project Rainbow had given him a power of ghostly flight. Then an odd sound, a sound like a flying disc, cast away. But neither dog nor shark would dare chase this. Dracula's mist, manifesting all its strength, had just bopped Jaws' moon out of orbit and into the tank below. Another wave of whoops surged from the crowd beneath as Jaws' former form came to light. He was a whopping great white, large even for his species. The terror he engendered was not even diminished by the dangling human legs which protruded from his stomach and threatened to tear through that tender flesh, and evoked images of children's footy pajamas. Now Dracula made himself known, in case his voice was not warning enough. A crowd of bats had been flying toward the zoo for about a minute now, summoned who knew how and from who knew where by the power of their master. When he became corporeal, these minions were there to anchor him in sky, their teeth and claws biting his cape, their fluttering wings some protection against the burning sun. Then a second mini-moon was gone, Dracula's own, which he pocketed swiftly. Werewolf no longer. He was officially face to snout with a beast 5 times his size. And he was not intimidated in the slightest. In fact, he maintained a benevolent smile, and manners rivaling the greatest of all sea animal trainers. "I am not your captor," he assured with a light touch on Jaws' nose. Now he felt Jaws trembling a fierce tremble. "Fury, child of fear. Stay calm and I will take you away from here." The Count figured that during this escape, Jaw would attempt to kill his captors or even the blameless zoo-going guests. Never did it occur to him that Jaw might direct any rage toward his savior. The truth is, Jaw's rage in that meeting was aimless. He wanted to open his mouth and blast rainbow-powered spectral lasers at the world, and once the burger was gone, Dracula simply happened to be the first part of that world in his path. Imagine that a lightning bolt like a thin white sun is blaring through your face. Now imagine that you are a vampire. I will not ask any more of you, for to force others to conceive the pain Dracula suffered, physical and psychical, ought to be a crime. He got such a wild sunburn. The blinds in Alice's penthouse were shut tight and the television's volume was kept down low, the better to evade suspicion. Until Dracula and Alice's arrival at this domicile, the foursome inside Robert, Adam, Trials, and the still tiny Bistritz was to stay put, stay hidden, rest up, and gather strength, insofar as was possible considering the stress. Alice's penthouse was rudimentary, and she seemed to have gone out of her way to make it supremely dull. True, in the corner there was a flower pot of mushrooms that were blue and moaning softly, but those were too wonderful to have been her doing, and best avoided. Aside from the windows and their off-white blinds, the walls were bare as sin and truth. Before the television was a simple wooden chair and, well, that suited Robert, for wherever there was a TV with a chair facing it, he adapted straightaway. Adam, who instead laid on the floor, had not adapted at all. The ride here, not to mention his raging hungeration, had made him languid and dreary. Just one vial and one bird's worth of blood had not curbed his appetite. After an hour more, perhaps, he would have to suffer the awkwardness of using his friends to feed. Clearly, however, what assailed him was more than mere starving and sickness, and neither could it be aptly summarized as a sickness of the mind. It was his continued coming into being, the jumbled thoughts. As the televised news whizzed by in dazzling 40,000K detail, in colors across the spectrum of visible light and even including infrared, ultraviolet and radio waves, and with sound quality that was passable, Robert watched and tried to keep focused, seeing this as his watchdog-like duty. Trials had long since retreated to the kitchen and, whatever she had found in Alice's pantry to eat, her noshing of wet food had become forgettable background noise not unlike the ambient squelching of Galapagos mud under tides. Adam was not watching the news either. When Robert had last torn his face from the screen and turned to him, he was in recline like the man of the Sistine Chapel, with bistritz perched on his finger as lightly as a butterfly. He had looked not quite idle and not quite philosophical. "Now for local news," said news anchor Charles Dodgson, and Robert redoubled his attention. Our top news story for today, living contraband. A precocious black cat has been spotted wandering around the Upper East End side. Robert was speechless, except for this word, "Wha?" Though the cat appears to not be a werewolf, police say don't be alarmed, don't touch it, and don't kick it, though the temptation may be great. He added a jovial smile. Chief Barkley assures us that the cat will soon be caught and vaccinated or, if it will not comply, taken by firing squad. No longer speechless but very nearly breathless, Robert huffed, "Adam. Are you getting this?" He plopped to his feet, turned to Adam and saw only the atom-sized vacuum where an atom should have been. The program interrupted his panic. Breaking news, monster criminals on the run. Ah, no. Robert's first assumption was that Adam was one of the criminals therein mentioned, but this was disproven when photos of Jaw and Dracula flashed onto the screen. His second assumption was that Adam had left in a foolhardy attempt to find Dracula and bring him back to the penthouse, perhaps even with Trials as a sidekick, or with that woman Alice as a sidekick. Since the news had just broken, this did not match up with the timeline, but it seemed valid enough, and gave him a shred of peace without substance. He looked in the corner of the television screen, where a clock made its home and its numbers proved that since the last time he checked, the sun had risen, cheered the sky, hit its apex, and more than begun its steep descent, for he had switched the news on in dark morning, and ended up in waning afternoon. "Am I really that old?" he asked himself in a whisper. As I watched the TV, was I intermittently dozing? "Eek eek eek," said a familiar, if newly tiny, voice from above. It was Bistritz, who alone had not abandoned him, hanging from the ceiling with his claws in the stucco. That phrase, roughly translated, meant, "You were napping for quite a while, Robert." Adam and Trials laughed, and I wasn't sure if I should stop them. That explained something, but it did not give Robert a guidepost for what to do next. He made a sigh of irritation, and of deep resignation, for the fact that he should be left out and kept in, however unintentionally, while others scour the werewolf nation. He returned to his seat only he switched the television off, pivoted the chair, and faced the door, watching for answers. In the waning afternoon of July 31st, 3001, a time shot through with solar glitter that had yellowed slightly with the march of a day's time, Brown House officials rushed to one of New York DC's innumerable parks to establish a podium, from which would be issued a public announcement of the gravest importance. Centuries prior, before the merging of the continent's two most popular and populous cities, this place had been called Washington Square Park. Though times, tastes, and the entire geographic location of this park had changed, the name had not, since Washington Square bark does not make any sense, except as regards the bark of the trees. The antique Washington Square arch that had served as its towering stone emblem since 1889 remained standing, and had even been lovingly touched up with gold leaf and copper tubing. The park had become a repository for all artifacts and memorials related to George Washington, the first president of that ancient nation once called the United States of America. History is an ever-rolling stone that gathers much moss, and many politicians. All those monuments became confusing clutter after a while, and so, for the sake of maximally convenient tourist attractions, it was all consolidated. Every square meter of the park held either a Washington portrait, a Washington fountain, a Washington bronze statue pointing majestically into another Washington statue's face, a Washington placemat, or, in the center, the one and only Washington monument, which took up most of the space. Today the Brown House's podium stood under the arch, with the Washington monument like a giant's white pencil high above them both. This public announcement was speedily planned and speedilier conducted, yet attendance was high. Werewolves thronged and licked their chops, thirsty for reassuring platitudes from their president. Then a rotorless helicopter touched down with a gust of authoritative wind. World President Igor stepped out, to instant, high applause. He was followed by First Lady Helen in a bright yellow power suit, some war guy in a cowboy hat, and a clown car's worth of black-garbed guards. Attached to the podium was a parasol, the better to hide Igor from the smiting sun. To make this attachment less suspicious and conspicuous, Brown House agents had introduced various objects with parasols attached to them to the global market through the decades. Rare was the household whose countertop did not include an umbrella attachment. But we are not here to discuss market trends. We witness this scene to watch an orator at work. People, said Igor, it is true that there are two criminals on the loose, Jaw, a crazed war veteran and zoo animal, and Vladimir Dracula, a warlord transient who has been on the run for centuries. It is true also that our city is under lockdown until these two wrongdoers have been captured. But there is no reason for alarm. There is no finer World Police Department than the World Police Department, and they are working tirelessly to capture these threats. Not only that, here he nearly chuckled, but they have a little help from my friends. Let's give a warm welcome to Helen, my lovely wife, and... He had forgotten the other werewolf's name, but that was okay, for renewed applause drowned out the tail end of his speech. He ducked back into the rotorless helicopter as a sea of camera shutters fought to snag his image, none of them clicking or flashing. Being futuristic, I am not certain cameras even had shutters. Helen stepped into his place, showing off her pearly, pointy whites. The werewolf cowpoke stood by her side, heavy-browed. Hello, everyone, said Helen. I'd like to start not with worry, but with celebration. The 4th of July is coming up, after all. She threw her arms wide, almost into her companion's face. This year marks 100 years of Igor. The park behind me is a vital reminder of the first president of the venerable nation whose land we now tread upon, George Washington. What makes a great leader? Courage? Honesty? Valor? A combination of these things, possibly? Yes. That's what character is, a combination of all the best things. Washington stepped down after 2 four-year terms, despite popular demand. My husband, following in his footsteps, is only just ending his generous first term, with plans to begin a second unless our extend the presidential term to 500 years bill passes, in which case his term is basically as good as forever. A roar of agreement in the crowd bubbled and burst. Yes, Helen cried, we have the best of both worlds, humility and benevolent tyranny. Give it up for my hubby. And they did. The sound and sheer force of it reverberated for many blocks, and, had so many werewolves clapped in a city of weaker constitution in, say, 21st century DC, the damage would have resembled a small earthquake. Then, when they had dwindled as near to silence as a joyous crowd could go, Helen said, let's talk business, specifically, the business of hunting vampires and cryptids. The wolfman beside me's been doing it his whole life, is that right? He of the cowboy hat nodded gruffly and took the mic he was handed. My father, and his father before him, and his father before him, and maybe a few ladies in there, he recollected, they all passed down this monster hunt in life to me. Dan Van Helsing's monster hotline is pleased as punch to be workin' with the Brown House and, lemme add, for the past few months now we've been educatin' the house on vampire protection, monster weakness 101, the works. Those unfortunate sons o' ghouls don't stand a chance. And Dan received abundant applause. There was little more to share. Citizens were merely advised to remain calm and proceed as normal, except with regards to city limits, which were not to be approached unless while wearing an insulated hazmat suit. If something was not currently relevant to the populace, the Brown House was not about to say it. Jaw and Dracula were public knowledge, but what use had anyone for fears of, say, fishmen, or renegade agents, or sandy solar vampires? Those innocent sods did not even know that the 4th of July would mark first contact. Soon the talk ended, and the guards were sucked into Igor's rotorless helicopter, which began to lift off. Dan and Helen stayed on the ground where the crowd would not let them leave without a handshake or several. Helen greeted guests with a relentless smile. Her smile did not even break when, as she crossed one wrist over the other to shake two hands at once, she turned to Dan and whisper-barked, "Dan. The real work starts now. We're sweeping this city. And if you can get a hold of Alice." "With all due respect," said Dan with a tip of the brim, "there's no need for the we." A third voice said, "Can you tip it again?" Dan did tip his hat again, a camera clicked. "Leave it to me, Helen. We'll see if I can't handle it." Perhaps Helen would have appreciated Dan's coxswain valiance had she been a politician and nothing more, without that title, the strongest werewolf woman in the world. As it was, she groaned. There was no chance to say more. Microphones were thrust in the muzzles of both, and they began to belt out 1-second sound bites for social media. After many, many minutes, the din was done, and only a morsel of the werewolf citizenry remained hungering for Dan's hand. Only Dan's, seeing as Helen, a skilled public figure, had long since slipped away without the people noticing. That left Dan to accept thanks, compliments, and other hollow sentiments. Another firm clasp and shake. "Mr. Helsing, sir, I can't thank you enough. How's the weather? Why in tarnation would you ask me that? Mr. Dan." Another firm clasp and shake. "Mr. Dan, oh, I'm so glad to see you like this. Oh, Mr. Dan." The wolf used the back of Dan's hand as a sweat wipe. But this was no fainting superfan, this was someone drenched in the sweat of fear. "Now, what are you doin'?" said Dan, ticked off. "Sorry, it's just." The panicker pointed a shaky hand into the deep, dark trees of Washington Square Park. The hand was Dan's. This werewolf was seriously nervous. There's a phantom in the park." Dan's mood turned on a dime. "Gee, really? That fast?" He whistled. "We're in business, boys." Tearing his hand from the citizen's grip, he rustled through his pockets. As you might guess, the pockets of all Brown House officials and employees were powerful deep, and his were no exception. He knew all the objects by touch and weight, the laser pistol, the holy water pistol, a needle of silver, a needle of gold, the X-shaped pieces from a party snack mix. Without a goodbye and with hands rumbling in his pockets, Dan walked briskly into the heart of the park. That shade trees could grow so large here, and fan their leaves out so broad above the heads of werewolves and Washingtons, was a miracle that gave the park a dusk-like ambience even in daytime. There was no helping the gloom, as the electric lanterns hanging from random tree limbs and statue arms would remain unlit for a while longer, and the lights placed on fountains had shorted. He stalked around between the exhibits, seeing nothing unusual, just people strolling about, acting as naturally as if there were no public danger whatsoever, despite the public announcement they had just heard. The Brown House considered this nonchalance a strength. And also, of course, some had not comprehended the announcement. Being werewolfinized animals, Dan spotted a couple of werewolves crouched heavy on a bough, probably squirrels or birds. But no, it was nothing unusual. Then a sound like a whip raced through, and a meter away, a wolf collapsed. Dan's ears and eyes pricked. Pricked eyes means small pupils. He ripped out his spectral goggles, thunked them over his sockets. The world became fuzzy and green, and should have revealed any invisible wolves or sharks in the vicinity. But as he swung his head around, he could not discern any clever shapes. Breathing deeply, he pocketed the goggles again, and resigned himself to natural senses for the supernatural hunt. All he heard, however, were the shuffles of werewolf feet. No problem, he muttered, and he just let his pockets. This would be his test bed for a new monster hunting strategy. After all, both Jaw and Dracula were werewolves, and why not the whole lot of them? This park was a dangerous place for rejects, as Adam would soon learn. Adam, an hour prior, had been driven from the penthouse by nothing but hunger, an unbelievable hunger that merged with a muddled mind until he was convinced that hunger had cleaved his consciousness to scorefold. In delirium had he pieced a disguise together using Alice's hall closet, boots, a trench coat with a massive hat, and, perhaps most essential, the domino mask, supremely face-concealing. He'd had the presence of mind to consume some drink-me so that he might at least approach a werewolf's height, and to ransack Alice's cabinets for a spare mini-moon which skated lazily round his aching head. The average werewolf of NYDC lacked the presence of mind to give him more than a sneer and a nice outfit. So he had been quite fortunate. The first minutes were euphoria, of the kind that comes with a state of flow. Adam, on seeming autopilot, had gone through side streets pricking the necks of passers-by, always striking with a papyrus strip as quick and thin as a whip, knocking out a werewolf at just enough of a distance to evade suspicion. The more blood he consumed, the greater his awareness and, mayhaps ironically, the greater his unease. The neon lights blaring already on storefronts and the radiant moon of his own head spoke of the city's sheer alien nature. Looking down, he cognized that these sidewalks, being conveyor belts, incessantly moved. Most of those werewolves cramped into a standing line with him, in front and behind, were entranced by the lights and sounds streaming from their hands, which cradled holograms, a word Adam did not even begin to know. The truly terrifying realization was that no street was just a street, and every human here was still as good as his killer. It was an easy matter to prick another neck and suck more blood, and strive to sate what was yet to be sated, yet Adam could no longer do it. The enormity of this world came upon him, and he went dreadfully still. Good thing the sidewalk carried him straight into Washington Square Park, where he could gather his bearings in welcome shade. I have never felt more alive, he soliloquized, leaning uncouthly against a painting, and never more dead. Not only am I lost and cursed with this bottomless hunger, I have yet to shake off this blasted headache. But this well suits me, added Adam, for a tree is some semblance of my old reality, surely it will calm me. Never. Adam interjected. How can I be calm again? Hunger of the flesh may pass, but hunger of the soul? A soul not only torn in two by loss of loving Eve, but torn to final shreds by my own dim wits concern me. Why did I come out here? Why could I wait for blood no longer? How can Dracula ever take me back, now that I have disobeyed? A mellow Adam contributed, nonsense, you are a team member to the end. To err is human, to forgive. But Adam waved this off. Pah. He may be able to forgive, but all men have limits. Dracula is no god. A distant voice said, hey, cool. Theater in the park. Most uncautious. Adam, in his divided yet intermingled tonguing, had attracted the attention of a distant werewolf. He did not, however, take notice, he only went on blathering. I am a pretender to the end, he crooned, and as he looked to the sky above, his mask caught a shred of reddening sun, and threatened to ignite his golden eyes. I pretend that nothing is wrong and my host sees right through. I pretend that all I crave is blood, but flesh wants flesh, and I have been too long denied. Lo, this misadventure is not for you, man, there is a world to save, maybe even 2 worlds. Be you not selfish? He fell to his knees on the grass and cried, selfish. Yes, I pity the days when I wasn't. At this line, the tiny crowd that had assembled before him began humble applause. They were all grinning, a sight he had never expected to see. Cheering him on. How ludicrous, like a crowd of clowns they were. To say Adam was bewildered as his eyes flitted from face to face would be an understatement. Their applause gave rise to an emotion of a height he had never thought attainable, outrage of the highest degree. He felt they had intruded. "Fie on thee, I say." And the red papyrus-like spider's limbs nearly shredded his coat, his arms thrown out like claws, his eyes the cinders of a furnace. The cries of fright were instant, all too familiar how quickly sympathies can turn, how marvelous the alchemy, and they scattered as birds from the gunshot. This was the very moment when the more substantial crowd at Washington Square Park, cheered by Helen's speech, applauded at magnitude 5. Adam experienced their roar and the snarl within himself as one and the same, one amalgam completing the other. For the first moment all day, he felt whole. When it all died down, when the wrappings wilted with the passing of his fury and retracted up his arms, Adam found himself perfectly alone himself, that is, and his 20 trains of thought. He pulled the ragged trench coat closer around himself. The mini-moon swept by his face, he shut his eyes to it, the better to suss out his own thoughts, if such a thing ever could be done. He became the drifting phantom of the park, walking slowly from shade to shade. A fanciful part of himself wondered if he might live here. Every few minutes, he left a quiet spike in a werewolf's neck, unheedful of whether they might hit grass to muffle the fall. So self-centered had he become that in his mind the police could not exist, let alone monster hunters. It was in this pit-deep melancholy that Dan came into his path. He stepped in front of Adam with the simple boldness natural to these city werewolves. This and the general nature of Adam's funk are the reasons he did not immediately see Dan for who he was, despite the familiar hat and smoky voice from a commercial he had once seen and despised. "Howdy," said Dan with a winning smile. "The name's Van Helsing. Do I know you?" Before Adam responded, before he could move at all, Dan trapped him with a handshake that flew to his leather-gloved palm like a slap, captured it, tugged it forward, and squeezed as if mistreating a crustacean. It was painful, abnormally so, even beyond the squeeze. There was something tiny in Dan's hand that stabbed straight through the glove and plunged into Adam's palm. The mummy's heartbeat quickened, his breath came short, thoughts of the present, memories of the past, fears of just what was transpiring within their clasped hands. This was the maelstrom of Adam's mind, stirred dreadfully by what felt like his fated end. Dan kept his tone leisurely, self-sure. "Heard tell there's monsters in these parts. You heard anything about that? A phantom, they're sayin'. Well, I'm a monster hunter, YCY may have heard o' me, and I got ways of findin' out. I can tell already," here he tightened his grip, Adam gritted his teeth, "that you've passed my first test. A spectral being wouldn't be feelin' much pain about now, seein' as they don't bleed. Now, the second component of the test is for vampirism, where I suspect you'll have a harder time. In my hand and yours, YC, is a needle of silver." Adam's mind, racing ahead, conjured an image of their hands unclasping to release blood-tinged steam, its awful wisps the proof of vampire's bane. No wonder the pain was driven so deep. Adam, drenched in sweat, did not react, and resigned himself to this moment. If he should be prey, let him be prey. Dan removed his hand. His palm, face up, revealed only blood. As did the glove, now stained. Evidently, silver was not a weakness Adam and Dracula shared. Had Dan placed on that needle's head a drop of holy water, however, the outcome would have been different. "Mr. Van Helsing now looked perplexed. Well, you still look suspicious," so, and with such speed that he interrupted himself, he snared Adam's wrists and twisted his body around, the better to handcuff. And Adam let himself be wrestled with and marched on a path out of the park, for the pieces of his mind were cooperating, and a few different plans were assembling within him. They would kill him, perhaps, but his position in the enemy's hands could scarcely have been any worse. Dan pushed him down a holostone path, with his wrists in one hand and a laser pistol in the other. This he kept steady against Adam's neck. "So my life will have some resolution," said Adam. "This is perfect, in a way. Was your other great ancestor Mary Shelley?" This revelation did not blindside Dan. It merely reminded him of what he already suspected. Frankenstein's monster was not only alive and well, but likely lurking in this very metropolis, in his very grip. Two things happened in the same instant. Adam bucked with superhuman strength, and Dan hammered a light bolt into his neck. The laser hit first. Nothing in Adam's arsenal was faster than light. Clearly he had not learned his lesson from Walter Whipple's demise. But to say light defeats light is to speak a falsehood. Actually, light intensifies light, nor can absolute blackness or the lesser light of the moon vanquish it, for a candle is not put out by the night. This is why a standard bullet, even one from a 19th century flintlock, would have done Dan far more good in this moment. While Adam felt a burning sensation in his laser-struck neck, it did not stop him, it hurried him on. He thrust himself out of Dan's grip, turned upon his oppressor, and improvised a speech 1,000 years in coming. Or in all probability he would have, had the Washington-studded fountain paces away not stirred, its meager waters shaking audibly, and then let loose a ghostly great white shark, a brute far too large to have been sensibly contained therein. Quite a sight he was, caught in a shimmering state between visibility and transparence, quite a meal Dan would make when the jaws shut trap-like around him. Jaw arced through the air and, like an arrow many times larger than its target, and with a wide-open mouth also, jammed into the earth that surrounded Dan, his tail shooting up like a spike. Adam watched, feeling snubbed. Then the werewolf Dracula hoisted his dripping self out of the same small fountain, and he called out softly, "Try not to kill him, now." Scarcely could Adam recollect himself when a stranger's voice from beyond a few concealing trees said, "Hey, cool. Battle in the park." "Wait," said that voice's companion, "isn't that a shark, and a war veteran?" There was a gasp. "Call 911. ARP." "Oh dear," mumbled Dracula. "We are really bad at this secrecy thing, huh?" It was time for their reunited party to fly. Dracula threw himself from the fountain, threw his hand onto Adam's back, and with a revolving shove threw the both of them onto the wall that was Jaw's back. The image of Jaw and all who held on to him disappeared with a flicker, and suddenly Dan was there, freed and looking oddly foolish, aiming two anti-ghost rifles straight up, having aimed for Jaw's uvula. But Dan, tenacious Dan, would not lose his cool so easily. If anything, this meeting had made his victory more certain. He pocketed his guns, raised a wrist communicator, and said, "Get me some rotorless helicopters around Washington Square. I found our guys." Over. He had neglected one detail, however. Jaw had soared straight down, into earth.